Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Ezra Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, way back in the deep hollows where most folks never go. If you're thinking about hiking alone in these mountains, you need to hear what happened to me. I'm not the kind of man who believes in ghosts or mountain spirits. Never was. I grew up playing bluegrass guitar in these same hills, and my grandma used to tell stories about haints and Cherokee spirits, but I figured they were just old tales to keep kids from wandering off. A place called Serpent's Hollow. I specialize in acoustic wildlife monitoring. That means I set up recording equipment to track animal populations by their sounds. Elk bugling, bear calls, bird songs. It's scientific work, nothing spooky about it. I've got a degree in biology and everything. The hollow sits about 8 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by hemlock trees that are older than America itself. The limestone walls create natural echo chambers that make every sound bounce around in ways that can fool your ears. Cherokee used to consider it sacred ground, and during the Civil War, deserters hid in the caves. Later, moonshiners set up stills back there because the law couldn't find them. I should have paid attention to that history. It was late October, 1979. The leaves had turned but hadn't fallen yet, painting the mountainsides in reds and golds that looked like fire in the morning mist. I'd been having trouble with my automated recording stations, expensive equipment that the Forest Service had just installed to monitor the elk population. Every few days, the digital recorders would malfunction. They'd run out of battery power way too fast, or the tapes would come back full of static. Sometimes the equipment would be moved from where I'd left it, like something had knocked it over. My supervisor thought it was vandals, or maybe bears getting curious. "Take Mackenzie with you," he said. "Check it out." Arbitrarily, Mackenzie was a good partner. Smart, careful, never complained about the long hikes. She'd been a ranger for about 5 years and knew the mountains almost as well as I did. She also happened to be Cherokee, though she didn't talk much about it. We hiked in on a Tuesday morning when the fog was so thick you could barely see 10 feet ahead. The trail down into Serpent's Hollow winds between those massive hemlocks, and their branches form a natural cathedral overhead. Usually, the place is full of bird songs and the chatter of squirrels. Morning, it was dead quiet. "Where are all the animals?" Mackenzie asked, adjusting her pack straps. She had her grandmother's dark eyes and moved through the woods like she was born there. Colonization, I'd been wondering the same thing. In 15 years of ranger work, I'd never heard the forest so silent. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the underbrush. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the air itself was swallowing sound. "Maybe the fog's got them laying low," I said, but I didn't believe it. We found the first recording station about a mile down the trail. The equipment was still there, but it had been moved about 20 feet from where I'd set it up. The microphone cables were arranged in a perfect circle around a flat stone, like someone had been very careful about placing them. "Bears don't do that," Mackenzie said, kneeling down to examine the setup. I checked the recorder. Still had power, still running, but when I rewound the tape to listen, all I heard was static. Then, about 10 minutes in, voices. Human voices, speaking in what sounded like Cherokee. Mackenzie went very still when she heard it. Her face got pale, and she rewound the tape to listen again. "What are they saying?" I asked. She listened for a long time before answering. "It's old Cherokee, very old. They're singing a death song." "Defenses? Death song?" "Something you sing when someone's dying. Or dead." She looked around the empty forest. "But Ezra, there's nobody here." This area's been uninhabited for decades. I took the tape out and put in a fresh one. Mackenzie reset the equipment while I tried to figure out what we'd recorded. The voices were clear, too clear for the old analog equipment we were using, and they were coming from multiple directions, like a whole group of people had been standing around our microphone singing. But there were no footprints in the soft earth, no signs that anyone had been there at all. We spent the rest of that day checking the other stations. Same thing at each one, equipment moved but not damaged, recordings full of static and voices speaking Cherokee. By the time we hiked back to the truck, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. "I don't like this," Mackenzie said as we drove back to the ranger station. She'd been quiet most of the afternoon, listening to the tapes on her headphones. Those songs, they're not just death songs, they're binding songs. Billing what? Souls. She looked out the window at the darkening mountains. My grandmother used to tell stories about shamans who could trap spirits, keep them from moving on to the next world. I wanted to tell her that was just superstition, but I'd heard those voices myself, clear as day, singing in harmony in a place where no humans lived. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that Cherokee singing echoing in my head, and underneath it, something else. A sound like wind through stone, or water running deep underground. The Bidden was calling to me, and I didn't know why. 3 days later, we got a call that changed everything. The dispatcher said over the radio, "Timothy Morrison, age 22, from Ohio State. Last seen heading towards Serpent's Hollow 2 days ago." Mackenzie and I looked at each other across the road. Ranger station break room. We both knew what the other was thinking. "Third one this month," I said. "Canonical," Mackenzie corrected. "Remember the girl from Virginia?" She was right. Sarah Chen, 19, had disappeared 3 weeks ago after telling friends she wanted to explore the singing caves she'd heard about online. Before that, an elderly man named Robert Hayes had vanished while looking for his grandfather's moonshine still. And before that, a local woman named Linda Cross had gone missing while gathering ginseng. Peacefully. Quarantine had last been seen heading into Serpent's Hollow. We organized a search party, me, Mackenzie, and 4 volunteers from the local volunteer fire department. Good men who knew the mountains, but they stayed quiet when we told them where we were going. Mountain people have long memories, and they remember when places get a reputation for swallowing folks up. The fog was even thicker this time, rolling up from the hollow like smoke from some underground fire. As we descended the trail, our flashlights barely penetrated the grey wall surrounding us. Colors. "Stay together," I called back to the group, "and stay on the trail. These limestone cliffs can open up without warning." Prohibited. About halfway down, Mackenzie grabbed my arm. "Listen." Lush. I stopped, holding up my hand to halt the group behind us. In the distance, barely audible through the fog, someone was humming. The grandparents, rising and falling like a lullaby. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the hemlock branches and the stone walls of the hollow. Flooring. "Tim?" I called out. "Timothy Morrison?" The humming stopped. We waited in the silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again. The same melody but from a different direction. Closer. "That's not human," whispered Jake Marlowe, one of the volunteers. He was a big man who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, but his voice was shaking. "Course it's human," I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The melody had too many harmonies, like one voice was singing in 4-part harmony with itself. Conquered. Mackenzie had gone very pale again. She was staring into the fog with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "Right now. We've got a missing hiker." Ezra. She turned to face me, and her dark eyes looked almost black in the dim light. "That song. I know that song. My grandmother sang it to me when I was little, but she made me promise never to sing it myself." Forbes. The humming was getting closer. Still impossible to pinpoint, but definitely closer. "What kind of song is it?" I asked. "A calling song. It's how the spirits find their way home." One of the other volunteers, a man named Pete Rodriguez, suddenly stepped off the trail and started walking toward the sound. Not hurrying, just walking with steady, determined steps like he had somewhere important to be. "Pathfinder," I called. "Where you going?" "Confiscaf." He didn't answer. Didn't even turn around. Just kept walking into the fog until we couldn't see him anymore. Jake started after him, but Mackenzie grabbed his sleeve. "Don't. Once you start following the song, you can't stop." "What do you mean you can't stop?" "I mean your feet won't let you. The melody gets in your head and your body just goes." The humming was all around us now, coming from the trees, from the rocks, from the fog itself. And I could feel it working on me, a gentle tugging sensation, like someone had tied a string around my chest and was slowly pulling me deeper into the hollow. Benches my feet wanted to move, had to move. The melody was so beautiful, so perfect, that standing still felt like fighting against the natural order of things. Sluggish Mackenzie must have seen the expression on my face, because she slapped me, hard, across the cheek. The sudden pain broke whatever spell the song was weaving. I blinked and realized I'd been walking. Not far, maybe 10 steps, but I was off the trail and heading toward a gap between two massive boulders that I'd never noticed before. Blindness. "We're leaving," Mackenzie said, her voice tight with fear. "All of us. Right now." Kennedy, the remaining volunteers, didn't argue. We turned and climbed back toward the road, as fast as the fog and steep trail would allow. Behind us, the humming continued, and once I thought I heard Pete's voice joining in the melody. Blinking. When we reached the parking area, I radioed for backup and additional search teams. By morning, we had 30 people combing every inch of Serpent's Hollow. We never found Pete Rodriguez, or Timothy Morrison. We did find something else. Deep in one of the limestone caves, maybe half a mile from where Pete had wandered off, we discovered a collection of musical instruments, flutes, drums, and something that looked like a primitive harp. They were all carved from bone, human bone. The lab results came back a week later, a few months old. Others were ancient, possibly hundreds of years old. All showed the same careful craftsmanship, the same attention to detail. Someone had been making music down there for a very long time, and they weren't using wood or metal for their materials. Confiscated. That night, I called Mackenzie at home. "We need to go back," I said. "Are you crazy?" "People are dying, Sarah, and I think whatever's in that hollow, it's getting stronger." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Flooring. My grandmother had a story," she said finally, "about a Cherokee shaman who made a terrible bargain to protect his people from something evil. He bound his own spirit to the land, along with the spirits of anyone who heard his song. You think that's what we're dealing with? I'm dealing with something that's been hungry for a very long time, and every person who disappears makes it more powerful." I hung up and stared out my cabin window at the dark mountains. Somewhere in those hills, something was humming in the fog, calling out to anyone foolish enough to listen. And despite everything I'd seen, I could still hear it. I could still hear the melody in my head, beautiful and patient and impossible to forget. It was waiting for me to come back. I should have listened to Mackenzie and stayed away from Serpent's Hollow, should have marked it as a dangerous area and let someone else deal with whatever was living down there. Instead, I did what 15 years of ranger training told me to do. I gathered more evidence. The next morning, I drove back alone with my best recording equipment, a professional-grade Marantz cassette recorder and a Shure microphone sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from 50 yards away. If something was making music in those caves, I was going to get a clear recording of it. The fog had lifted, which should have made me feel better. It didn't. In daylight, Serpent's Hollow looked even more wrong than it had in the mist. The hemlock trees stood too still, their branches hanging like they were weighted down with invisible ice. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the stream that ran through the bottom of the hollow was silent, just water flowing over stone without the usual babble and splash. I set up my equipment at 3 different locations, spacing them about a quarter-mile apart. If the singing was coming from the caves, triangulating the sound sources would help me find the exact location. At the first station, near the limestone cliffs where we'd found Pete's footprints, I placed the microphone and recorder behind a fallen log. The tape had 90 minutes of recording time. If nothing happened, I'd just have 90 minutes of silence. Sometimes happened. About 30 minutes after I started recording, the Cherokee singing began. But this time, it wasn't the simple humming melody we'd heard before. This was a full ceremonial chant, multiple voices weaving in and out of harmony with a complexity that made my skin crawl. I was listening through headphones connected to the recorder, so I heard every note with perfect clarity. The voices were singing in Cherokee, but underneath the words, I could hear other sounds. Wind through hollow bones, water dripping in deep caves, and something that sounded like breathing. Slow, patient breathing from something with very large lungs. I tried to stay objective, to think like a scientist, documenting an unknown phenomenon. But the song was getting inside my head the same way it had before, making my feet want to move toward the source. This time, I let them. I told myself following the sound to find its origin. That's what any good researcher would do. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. The melody was controlling me, pulling me deeper into the hollow, like a fish on a line. I'd somehow missed in all my years of working this area. It was hidden behind a screen of mountain laurel, just a narrow crack in the limestone that looked like it couldn't fit a person. Washed when I pushed through the bushes, the crack opened into a passage wide enough to walk through, and from somewhere in the darkness ahead, the singing was getting louder. I had a flashlight on my belt, but I didn't need it. The passage was faintly lit by some kind of phosphorescent moss growing on the walls. Or maybe it wasn't moss. Maybe it was something else entirely. Lopez sloped downward for maybe 50 yards, then opened into a natural chamber the size of a small church. And that's when I saw them. 12 people sitting in a circle around a pool of black water. Men and women of different ages, all wearing modern hiking clothes. Their eyes were closed and their mouths were open, singing in perfect harmony. I recognized 3 of them immediately. Timothy Morrison, the college student from Ohio. Linda Cross, the local woman who'd gone missing a month ago. And Pete Rodriguez, still wearing the same flannel shirt he'd had on when he walked away from our search party. They'd been down here for weeks, some of them, but they looked fresh, like they'd just sat down to rest a few minutes ago. Blinds behind them, barely visible in the phosphorescent glow, sat another figure. This one was different. Older, wearing what looked like traditional Cherokee clothing, deerskin shirt, bone ornaments, long grey hair braided with feathers and shells. His eyes were open, and they were looking right at me. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth had been replaced with carved bone, and his smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Gestured for me to join the circle. My feet started moving before my brain could stop them. Step by step, I walked toward the group of singing people, toward the pool of black water that reflected no light at all. The Cherokee man, the singer, that's how I started thinking of him, began a new verse. The words were in a language I didn't understand, but somehow I knew what they meant. Come home, come rest, come sing with us forever. I was 3 steps away from the circle when I heard Mackenzie's voice shouting my name from somewhere behind me. Bronze broke the spell, just enough for me to stop walking. I turned and saw her silhouetted in the tunnel entrance, flashlight in one hand and something else in the other. Don't listen to him, Ezra, she called. He's not Cherokee anymore. He hasn't been Cherokee for 200 years. The singer stood up from behind the circle of captive people. In the dim light, I could see that he wasn't entirely solid anymore. more like a shadow wearing the shape of a man. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once, like the cave walls themselves were talking. "Your friend knows the old stories," he said in perfect English. "She knows what I sacrifice to keep the hungry one sleeping. Every soul I bind makes the binding stronger." "What hungry one?" I managed to ask, though my throat felt like it was full of cotton. The singer gestured toward the pool of black water. "Something that crawled up from the deep places when the world was young, something that would devour every living thing if it ever woke up. I gave my life to chain it here, and I gave my afterlife to keep feeding it just enough to stay asleep." Mackenzie had entered the chamber now, and I could see what she was holding in her other hand. A wooden flute, carved with intricate designs. "Your grandmother's?" I asked. She nodded. "She taught me the counter-song when I was little, made me promise to learn it, even though she hoped I'd never need to use it." The singer laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "One little Cherokee girl with a wooden flute? Against 2 centuries of bound souls? Child, you don't understand what you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Mackenzie said, raising the flute to her lips. "But I understand what you've forgotten." Southeastern. She began to play. The melody that came from her flute was simple, almost childlike, but it cut through the complex harmony of the bound souls like a knife through silk. One by one, the singing people opened their eyes and looked around in confusion. Pete Rodriguez was the first to stand up. He blinked at me like he was waking from a long dream. "Ezra? Where are we?" The singer roared with rage and lunged toward Mackenzie, but his form was already becoming less solid. The simple melody from her flute was unraveling whatever spiritual threads held him together. "You doing?" he screamed. "If the binding breaks, if the hungry one wakes—" "The binding doesn't have to break," Mackenzie said, still playing. "It just needs a new anchor. Someone willing to take your place." She looked at me, and I understood. Perverse, the countersong wasn't meant to destroy the singer's work. It was meant to transfer it to someone else, someone who could do the job without stealing souls to feed the thing in the pool. Blindness. I walked to the center of the circle and knelt beside the black water. "I'll take his place," I said. "I'll be the new guardian." The singer's form solidified again, but now he looked more like a man and less like a shadow. The bone teeth were gone, replaced by human ones. The carved ornaments in his hair had turned back into simple feathers. "You understand what you're choosing?" he asked. "You'll be bound to this place forever. You'll hear every footstep in the hollow, feel every threat to the sleeping thing below. You'll never be free." I looked at the 12 people who were slowly standing up around the pool. People who would go home to their families, who would live their lives instead of spending eternity as living batteries for an ancient binding spell. "I understand," I said. Mexico's flute song reached a crescendo, and suddenly I could feel the weight of the hollows settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I could sense every animal in the forest above, every hiker on the distant trails, every breath of wind through the hemlock trees. And far below, in depths that human tools had never measured, something vast and patient stirred in its sleep before settling back into dreams of hunger. The singer smiled, with human teeth this time, and began to fade. "Coinbase. Thank you," he whispered as he disappeared. 200 years is a long time to stand guard alone." The 12 freed souls stumbled out of the cave like sleepwalkers waking up. They remembered nothing about their time in the binding circle, just fragments of beautiful music and dreams about being part of something larger than themselves. Mackenzie led them back to the surface, while I stayed behind in the chamber, learning what it meant to be the guardian of Serpent's Hollow. The knowledge came all at once, flooding into my mind like water through a broken dam. I could see the entire hollow as if from above, every trail, every cave, every hidden passage. I could feel the network of limestone passages that honeycombed the mountain, and the deep places where even the Cherokee had never ventured. At the very bottom, in a cavern that had never known sunlight, the hungry one dreamed its ancient dreams. It had been sleeping for millennia, but it wasn't truly dormant. Like a hibernating bear, it was aware of changes in its environment. Every few decades it would stir and test the strength of its bonds. The disappearances in Serpent's Hollow weren't random. They happened when the thing below grew restless and needed to be reminded that the binding was still strong. The singer had been feeding it captured souls to keep it calm. I would have to find another way. Over the following weeks, I learned to use my new abilities. I could influence the wildlife in the hollow, encouraging dangerous animals to avoid human visitors. I could shift the acoustics of the cave systems, making sure that only the most determined explorers would find the deeper passages. And when necessary, I could manifest just enough supernatural activity to scare away anyone who got too close to the forbidden places. The official report blamed the disappearances on a previously unknown cave system with dangerous gas pockets. The area was closed to the public, and I was assigned as the permanent caretaker. Manageable, I hiked the trails, maintained the barriers, and made sure no one wandered into places they shouldn't go. The hollow was peaceful during daylight hours, with birds singing and squirrels chattering and the normal sounds of a healthy forest. But at night, I could feel the hungry one stirring in its dreams. And sometimes, when the moon was dark and the fog was thick, it would send tendrils of influence up through the limestone, testing the boundaries of its prison. Were the nights when I had to go down into the caves and sing to it. Not Cherokee songs, I didn't know any. Instead, I sang the Appalachian folk tunes I'd learned as a child, the mountain ballads that my grandmother had taught me before I'd ever heard of park rangers or acoustic monitoring. The hungry one seemed to like them. The ancient melodies would calm its restless stirring, and by morning the hollow would be quiet again. Until the night Sarah Mackenzie came back. It was almost midnight, and I was sitting by my cabin reading incident reports when I heard footsteps on the trail outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone walking through the dark without a flashlight. When I opened the door, Mackenzie was standing at the edge of my porch. But something was wrong with her. Her skin had a pale, waxy look in the moonlight, and her eyes reflected light like an animal's. "Hello, Ezra," she said in a voice that sounded like hers but felt completely wrong. "Sarah? What are you doing here? It's past midnight." She saw that her teeth had been replaced with carved bone. "I've come to finish what we started," she said. "The binding is weak. One guardian isn't enough to hold something that old and hungry. You need help." I backed away from the door, my hand moving toward the flute I now carried everywhere. Mackenzie's grandmother had taught her the countersong, but she'd also taught her other things. "You're not Sarah," I said. "I am." She stepped onto the porch, moving with that same fluid grace I remembered, but her footsteps made no sound at all. "I'm just improved. The hungry one showed me things, Ezra. Beautiful things. It doesn't want to destroy the world. It wants to remake it. No more death, no more pain. Just endless music and eternal dreams." "Where's the real Sarah?" "I am the real Sarah. The Sarah you knew was just the part that was afraid. I'm the part that understands what we could become if we stopped fighting what's down there and started working with it." She raised her hand, and I saw the wooden flute her grandmother had carved. But the designs on it had changed. Instead of Cherokee symbols, they were covered with twisting patterns that hurt to look at. "Play with me, Ezra. Help me wake it up properly. Together, we can reshape the binding into something beautiful." She put the flute to her lips and began to play. The melody was wrong in every possible way. It sounded like Mackenzie's countersong, but played backward and inside out. Instead of breaking spiritual bonds, it was designed to twist them into new shapes. I could feel the effect immediately. The protective barriers I'd woven around the hollow began to unravel. Deep underground, the hungry ones stirred with something that might have been joy. I raised my own flute, a simple wooden instrument I'd carved myself from mountain ash, and began to play the strongest binding song I knew. For a few minutes we duelled with music in the midnight air. Her corrupted counter-melody against my hastily improvised binding song, the sound echoing off the valley walls like competing storms. But I was one person against something that had been preparing for this moment since the night we'd first entered its domain. The false Mackenzie's song was stronger, more complex, backed by centuries of malevolent patience. I felt my defenses cracking. That's when I heard the other flute. The forest stepped out Anger, playing the original countersong her grandmother had taught her. She looked tired and scared, with scratches on her face and mud on her clothes like she'd been running through the woods for hours. "It tried to copy me," she called over the competing melodies. "Used my own memories against me, but it couldn't copy this." She held up something I hadn't noticed before, a small bundle of sage and sweetgrass, tied with sinew and decorated with a single eagle feather. Traditional Cherokee ceremony materials. The false Mackenzie's song wavered as the real one approached. Whatever force had created the duplicate, it was weakening now that the original was present. "You can't stop what's coming," the duplicate said, her voice starting to sound hollow and distant. The binding was always meant to be temporary. The singer knew that. Why do you think he chose a white man to replace him? "Mean?" I asked, though I kept playing my binding song. "He knew you'd eventually fail. Knew you didn't have the cultural knowledge to maintain a Cherokee binding spell forever. You were never meant to be the permanent solution, just a delaying tactic while the real guardian prepared herself." False Mackenzie gestured toward the real one, who was now lighting the sage bundle with a match from her pocket. Sarah's grandmother didn't just teach her the countersong, she taught her everything. The real binding ritual, the one that doesn't require stolen souls. Sarah's been preparing her whole life to take this responsibility. The real Mackenzie stepped forward, still playing her flute with one hand while holding the burning sage with the other. "It's true," she said. "Grandmother always knew this day would come. The singer's binding was evil, effective, but evil. Stealing souls to feed the thing he was supposed to be containing. She spent 50 years developing a better way." "What kind of better way?" "Relinquishing sacrifice instead of stolen souls. One person, freely given, binding themselves to the land, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. Working with the mountain's natural defenses instead of fighting against them." A false Mackenzie laughed. "You think you're strong enough to contain something that old? Child, you have no idea what you're dealing with." "I don't have to contain it," real Mackenzie said, approaching the duplicate with the burning sage. "I just have to understand it. Grandmother taught me that the hungry one isn't evil. It's just lost, separated from whatever realm it came from. It doesn't want to destroy our world. It wants to go home." Ben's smoke reached the false Mackenzie, and she screamed as her form began to dissolve. "You'll doom us all! Without the binding, it will wake up completely." "Without the binding, it will finally be able to leave," Mackenzie corrected. She knelt beside the pool of black water that had somehow appeared at our feet. The chamber from below had risen to meet us, bringing the heart of the binding with it. The real Mackenzie placed her hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for holding the line, Ezra, but this was always meant to be my responsibility." She put the flute to her lips one final time and played a song I'd never heard before. It wasn't a binding song or a counter song. It was something else entirely. A song of opening, of paths between worlds, of old powers finally finding their way home. Confiscated, deflate us, the hungry ones stirred. But instead of rage or malevolence, I felt something like relief radiating up from the depths. It had been waiting so long to go home. The opening of the path took 3 days. I felt it happening in stages. First, the dissolution of the old binding, then the establishment of something new and cleaner, and finally the moment when something vast and ancient stirred itself fully awake for the first time in millennia. But when the hungry one finally rose from its deep places, it didn't bring destruction. It brought departure. I was standing on the rim of Serpent's Hollow with Sarah Mackenzie when it happened. The air shimmered like heat waves, and for just a moment I could see through the fabric of the world to somewhere else, a place of strange geometries and impossible colors, where creatures like the Hungry One belonged. The hollow fell silent in a way it had never been before. Not the unnatural quiet of a bound spirit, but the peaceful silence of a place finally at rest. "Is it over?" I asked. Linus nodded, though she looked exhausted. The ritual had taken something out of her. I could see new grey in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's over. The path is closed and the binding is broken. Serpent's Hollow is just another valley now." We walked down into the hollow together, past the hemlock trees that were already showing signs of new life. Birds were returning, insects were buzzing, and the stream was making its normal cheerful noise as it tumbled over the limestone rocks. The Blake where I'd spent so many nights singing to keep an ancient horror asleep was gone. Not collapsed, gone, like it had never existed at all. In its place was just another hillside, covered with mountain laurel and wild rhododendrons. "What about me?" asked. "Am I still bound to this place?" Mackenzie said, "When the Hungry One left, it took all the old bindings with it. You're free to go wherever you want." But I didn't want to go anywhere else. 15 years of ranging these mountains had made them home, and the week I'd spent as guardian of the hollow had only deepened that connection. This was where I belonged, supernatural responsibility or not. I kept my job with the Forest Service. The official records show that Serpent's Hollow was reopened to the public after a geological survey confirmed that the dangerous gas pockets had dissipated. The missing hikers were found, disoriented but unharmed, in various locations around the forest, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. Sarah Mackenzie left the Ranger Service a month later. She told our supervisor that she'd been accepted into a graduate program in anthropology, but I knew the real reason. Her grandmother's teachings had included more than just the knowledge needed to deal with the Hungry One. There were other places in the mountains where old powers still slept, and other families who had been keeping watch for generations. She had work to do. She still see her sometimes, hiking the remote trails with her recorder and her notebook, documenting the old stories before the last people who remember them pass away. We don't talk about what happened in the hollow. Some things are better left unspoken. But sometimes, when I'm doing my evening rounds and the mist is rising from the valleys, I'll hear her playing that wooden flute her grandmother carved. The melodies drift through the mountains like messages between worlds, keeping the balance that her people have maintained for longer than written history records. I understand now why the Cherokee considered these mountains sacred. There are layers to this place that go deeper than geology or biology, layers of story and spirit and responsibility that most people never see. And I understand why my hearing was damaged in that construction accident 15 years ago, right before I became a park ranger. Some things can only be learned through listening, and some kinds of listening require a special kind of silence. The hollow song is finished now. The ancient melody that bound spirits and fed horrors and trapped souls in eternal servitude has been replaced by something better, the simple, honest music of a forest that's finally at peace. Night, when the fog rolls thick through Serpent's Hollow and the mountains remember their older names, I sometimes hear echoes of what used to be. Not the Cherokee death songs or the binding chants, but something even older, the sound of the world when it was young, when the barriers between realms were thinner and stranger things walked among the trees. If you're hiking alone in these mountains and you hear music in the mist, don't follow it. Not because it will trap your soul or lead you to some terrible fate, but because some songs aren't meant for human ears. Some music belongs to the mountains themselves, and they've been singing their ancient harmonies long before we arrived, and will continue long after we're gone. Listen if you want, but remember that you're just passing through their territory, and the mountains will decide what you're allowed to hear. My name is Ezra Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, in a place where the old songs have finally found their proper ending. And every night, I listen to the mountains sing themselves to sleep. My name is Luther Hawkins, and I've been a ranger for 23 years. I've seen dead bodies before, car accidents on mountain roads, hunters who got careless, hikers who took wrong turns in winter storms. But I'd never seen anything like what I found under Devil's Backbone Bridge that cold morning in February 1984. Call came in at 6 a.m. Bridge inspector named Tommy Chen was supposed to check the old stone bridge yesterday, but never reported back. His truck was still parked at the trailhead, keys in the ignition, radio crackling with static. I knew that bridge well. Built it myself, actually. Well, rebuilt it. The original went up in 1847, some kind of Irish stonework that used techniques nobody remembers anymore. By 1981, ice and time had made it dangerous, so the Forest Service hired me to fix it up. Took 2 years of careful work, matching stones, learning how the old mortar held together. Devil's Backbone Bridge crosses a 300-foot gorge in Jefferson National Forest. It's the only way to reach 15,000 acres of wilderness on the far side. No roads, no other trails, just that bridge, 60 feet of weathered limestone blocks spanning empty air above an underground river. The morning I found Tommy, ice covered everything. Winter storms had been hitting Virginia hard that year, and the bridge was slick as glass. I took my time getting across, testing each step. The stonework felt solid under my boots. Good, honest construction that would outlast us all. I found Tommy at the bottom of the gorge. His body lay twisted on the rocks beside the underground stream, arms bent at impossible angles. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. He was smiling. Not a death grin, not like his face had frozen. A peaceful, happy smile, like he'd seen something wonderful before he died. I called it in and waited for the rescue team. While I waited, I walked the bridge again, looking for loose stones, checking for ice damage. The old mortar between the blocks looked strange in the grey morning light. Darker than I remembered, with red streaks that could have been iron staining, or something else. My radio crackled. "Luther, you there?" "Yeah, Bill." "Coroner wants to know, any signs Tommy fell? Broken railings, anything like that?" I looked at the bridge rails. Solid stone, 4 feet high, built to last centuries. No way a careful man like Tommy just tumbled over. "While damage," I told Bill, "rails are perfect." But they weren't perfect, I realized as I hung up. Something was wrong with the mortar. In the growing daylight, I could see it clearly now. Dark fragments mixed in with the limestone cement. Pieces that looked like paycheck, like bone. I'd rebuilt this bridge myself, mixed every batch of mortar by hand. I knew what went into it: sand, lime, water, nothing else. But there in the joints between stones, I saw what looked like bone chips, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. 23 years in these mountains, and I thought I knew every inch of this forest. I grew up in coal country, lost my brother David in a mine collapse when I was 19. Death was no stranger. But standing on that bridge, looking at those bone fragments in the mortar, I felt something I hadn't felt since David died. For kind that makes your hands shake and your mouth go dry. Because bridges don't build themselves, and somebody, sometime, had mixed human bones into the mortar that held this bridge together. The rescue team arrived by helicopter an hour later. They winched Tommy's body up from the gorge while I watched from above. As they loaded him into the chopper, the pilot shouted over the rotor noise, "Hell of a fall! What happened?" While looking back at the bridge rails, solid and unbroken, looked at the bone fragments in the mortar, dark against the limestone. "I don't know," I called back, but I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know. 3 days after we found Tommy Chen, I got another call. This one came from the sheriff's office in Lynchburg. "Luther, we got a missing person report. Day hiker named Sarah Morrison went out to Devil's Backbone yesterday morning, never came home." Pornography went cold in my hands. Anyone check the bridge? That's why I'm calling you. Can you take a look? I drove up to the trailhead with a sick feeling in my stomach. Sarah's car was there, a little red Honda with Virginia Tech stickers on the back window. 22 years old, according to her driver's license in the glove compartment, majoring in geology. The trail to the bridge was covered in fresh snow from the night before. Sarah's footprints were clear as day, heading toward the bridge. Small boots, steady pace. She'd walked right up to the stone rail and the prints just stopped. I spent an hour searching, walking every inch of the bridge, checking for broken stones, ice damage, anything that could explain how a healthy young woman just vanished. The bridge was solid, the rails were intact, but Sarah Morrison was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the bone fragments in the mortar, about Tommy's peaceful smile, about Sarah's footprints ending at empty air. I pulled out the old construction records from my filing cabinet, looking for answers. The bridge renovation had taken 2 years. We documented everything: soil samples, stress tests, historical research. But as I flipped through the files, I found something I'd forgotten. Original construction, 1847. Inside was a letter from the Virginia Historical Society, written by Dr. Margaret O'Brien, a folklore specialist. She'd researched the original bridge builders, Irish immigrants who'd worked on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. But bridge, she wrote, was constructed using traditional Irish techniques, including the practice of blood mortar, mixing animal blood into limestone cement to increase binding strength. Local legends suggest the workers may have used more than animal blood. Blood mortar. I'd heard of it but thought it was just old wives' tales. Yet here was documented proof that the original builders had mixed something organic into their mortar. And if they'd started with animal blood, what might they have moved to when animals weren't enough? The next morning I drove back to the bridge. In the mortar were even more obvious. I took my geology pick and carefully extracted a few pieces, sealing them in evidence bags. Small fragments, weathered smooth by 137 years of Virginia weather, but unmistakably organic. The wind picked up, whistling through the gorge below. But there was something else in that sound, almost like voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Irish, maybe, or something older. I finished collecting samples and started back to my truck. That's when I heard footsteps on the bridge behind me. Large footsteps, like someone wearing work boots. I turned around. The bridge was empty. The footsteps stopped. I walked back onto the bridge, checking every stone block, every shadow. Nothing. But the sound had been real. I'd heard it clear as day, echoing off the gorge walls. As I stood there in the silence, something else caught my attention. The mortar between the stones was different, fresher somehow, like it had been recently mixed. The bone fragments looked whiter, less weathered, like they were new. That evening, I drove to the county library in Lynchburg and spent hours in the local history section. What I found made my blood run cold. Newspaper clipping from 1847. 5 Irish workers missing. Bridge construction halted. From 1923. Hiker vanishes near Devil's Backbone. Search continues. Local man falls from bridge. 3rd death this year. 1967. Student disappears during geological survey. A pattern going back 137 years. People disappeared near that bridge. Not all of them fell. Some just vanished, like Sarah Morrison. And always, the disappearances came in clusters, separated by years of safety. And drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Whatever was happening at Devil's Backbone Bridge, it had been happening for over a century. And somehow, during my renovation work, I'd awakened something that had been sleeping. Something that demanded payment. That night, I dreamed about the bridge. In the dream, I was standing on the limestone blocks, but they weren't solid anymore. They were soft, wet, bleeding red mortar onto my boots. And from deep in the gorge below, I could hear voices calling. powerless, calling my name. I should have closed the bridge, should have strung yellow tape across both ends and called it a safety hazard until we figured out what was happening. But I'd built that bridge with my own hands. And 23 years of ranger training told me structures didn't just kill people on their own. I was wrong. Coming at a call from my supervisor, Bill Chen, Tommy's older brother. His voice was tight with grief and anger. "Luther, I want that bridge inspected, top to bottom. Whatever killed Tommy, I want it found." "Bill, I've been over every inch." "Then do it again, and this time take Jim Morrison with you." Jim Morrison, Sarah's father. He'd volunteered for the search team, desperate to find answers about his daughter's disappearance. I tried to talk him out of it, but the man was determined. "She was studying the geological formation," Jim told me as we hiked toward the bridge Saturday morning. "Said she wanted to write her senior thesis on limestone bridge construction. Always was curious about old things." Jim was a geology professor at Virginia Tech, thin and scholarly, carrying a bag full of testing equipment. He moved carefully on the icy trail, stopping every few yards to examine rock formations. "Interesting mortar work," he said when we reached the bridge. "The color variations suggest multiple construction periods." He pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the joints between stones. After a few minutes, his expression changed. "Luther, these aren't mineral inclusions." "What do you mean?" He pointed to the bone fragments with his pick. "These are organic, calcified but definitely organic, probably human. Air between us, human bones in the mortar, just like I'd suspected." "How many?" I asked. Jim spent another hour examining the bridge structure, taking notes, collecting samples. When he finished, his face was pale. "Dozens," he said quietly. "Maybe hundreds. This entire bridge is held together with human remains." We were standing in the middle of the bridge when the sound started. Low at first, like wind through the gorge, then louder, more distinct. Voices speaking in what sounded like Irish Gaelic, echoing up from the depths below. Jim heard it too. "What the hell is that?" The voices grew louder, more urgent. And with them came another sound, grinding stone, like massive blocks shifting against each other. The bridge beneath our feet began to vibrate. "We need to get off here," I said. But as we turned toward shore, the vibration intensified. Mortar dust rained down from the joints between stones. And in that dust, I saw something that made my heart stop. Fresh bone fragments, white as chalk, still wet with something that wasn't mortar. The grinding sound grew deafening. Jim grabbed my arm, shouting something I couldn't hear over the noise. The bridge swayed like it was caught in an earthquake, but the surrounding mountains were perfectly still. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. Silence. Perfect, terrifying silence. Jim and I looked at each other, both breathing hard. The bridge felt solid again under our feet. The voices from below had faded, but the fresh bone fragments in the mortar dust were real. "We're leaving," I said, "right now." We made it to the shore and turned back to look at the bridge. In the afternoon sunlight, it looked normal. Ancient, weathered limestone spanning the gorge, just like it had for 137 years. But I could swear the stones had shifted slightly, rearranged themselves into a different pattern. That evening, Jim called me at home. His voice was shaking. "Luther, I analyzed those samples. The bone fragments aren't 137 years old. Carbon dating puts them at less than 6 months. My blood went cold. 6 months ago was when I'd finished the bridge renovation. There's more, Jim continued. I found traces of calcium phosphate in unusual concentrations. That's what makes up human bone tissue. But it's fresh, like it was deposited recently. What are you saying? I'm saying that bridge is still growing, still adding bone to its structure, and I think I know where it's getting the material. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen staring at the wall, fresh human bones in 137-year-old mortar. People disappearing without a trace. Voices speaking ancient Irish in empty air. Whatever lived under Devil's Backbone Bridge was hungry, and it had been feeding for over a century. The phone rang again. I almost didn't answer. Luther? It was Bill Chen, my supervisor. His voice was different, flat, emotionless. I need you to meet me at the bridge tomorrow morning. Official inspection. Bill, I don't think that's safe. 6 a.m. Don't be late. He hung up before I could argue. I spent that night loading my truck with every piece of safety equipment I owned. Ropes, flares, emergency radio, first aid kit. Because I had a terrible feeling that tomorrow morning, one of us wasn't coming home. And deep down, I suspected it wouldn't be whatever was living in the bridge. Sunday morning came grey and cold. I drove to the trailhead, hoping Bill would change his mind, call off the inspection. His truck was already there, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I called his name. No answer. I followed his footprints through the snow to the bridge. They led straight to the centre of the span and stopped. Just like Sarah Morrison's. Just like Tommy Chen's. But this time, there were drag marks in the snow, leading to the edge of the bridge and over the rail. I looked down into the gorge and saw Bill Chen's body on the rocks below, arms spread wide, that same peaceful smile on his face that I'd seen on his brother. As I reached for my radio to call for help, I heard footsteps behind me on the bridge, heavy boots on stone. The thing that had been taking people for 137 years. The bridge keeper stood 8 feet tall, made of limestone blocks and human bones fused together by dark mortar. Where its face should have been, smooth stone formed crude features, empty sockets that seemed to look right through me, a mouth that was just a crack in the rock. The bones that made me sick, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, woven through its body like a twisted skeleton, arm bones, leg bones, ribs, all held together by that same dark mortar I'd been finding in the bridge structure. Luther Hawkins, it said, and its voice was the grinding of stone on stone. Bridge builder. A hand on my rail. What are you? And I heard the crunch of bone fragments under its massive feet. When it moved, mortar dust fell like snow. I am the foundation, it said, the binding that holds stone to stone. Without me, the bridge falls. The way closes. The crossing ends. You've been killing people. I have been fed, as was promised, as was agreed. Structure around us, and I saw the truth for the first time. Every joint between stones contained human bones. Every crack was sealed with remains. The entire bridge was a massive grave, held together by death. The first builders knew, the keeper said. Irish stoneworkers who remembered the old ways. They fed me 5 of their own to bind the first stones, and promised more when the binding weakened. I thought about the newspaper articles I'd found. Disappearances every 20 years or so, like clockwork. Enough death to keep the bridge standing, but spread out over time so no one would notice the pattern. But you rebuilt the bridge, it continued, disturbed the old bones, weakened the binding with your modern mortar, your steel reinforcement, your ignorance of proper ritual. The thing moved closer, and I could smell it now, earth and lime and decay, like an open grave. So I have taken more. The inspector, the girl who studied stones, the supervisor who sent them, and soon the builder who destroyed my work. I was trying to make it safe. Safe? The keeper laughed, a sound like rocks falling. This bridge has stood for 137 years through ice storms and floods, through war and earthquake. It was built to last forever, but forever requires payment. I was trapped against the rail now, 300 feet above the gorge. The thing reached out with hands made of bone and stone, fingers that could crush my skull like an eggshell. Spent 23 years maintaining bridges, and I knew something about structural engineering that the keeper had forgotten. Wait, I said. You need me. The stone hands stopped inches from my throat. You've been taking random people, hikers, inspectors, students. But that's not how it worked originally, is it? The Irish builders chose who to sacrifice. They picked their own workers, men who understood the ritual, who went willingly. The keeper's stone features shifted slightly.
Listening. You're hungry because you're getting the wrong food, I continued. People who don't understand, who fight and struggle. What you need is someone who knows the bridge, who respects the old ways. You offer yourself? I offer to fix what I broke, to rebuild the bridge properly this time, with the right materials, the right rituals. For a long moment, the keeper considered this. Around us, the bridge vibrated slightly, limestone blocks grinding against their mortar bonds. You would use the old methods? Mix bone with mortar? Seal the joints with blood? If that's what it takes to make it stable. And the payment? The feeding? I fast. I'll arrange it. Proper sacrifice. Willing volunteers who understand what they're doing. No more random killing. The keeper stepped back, studying me with those empty stone sockets. You lie, Luther Hawkins. You hope to trick me, to promise what you cannot deliver. Try me. I will. But know this. If you fail, if you try to deceive me or destroy me, I will take not just you, but everyone who crosses this bridge for the next 100 years. Your failure will feed me for centuries. The thing began to sink into the bridge structure, stone merging with stone, bones disappearing into mortar joints. 1 month, its voice echoed from the limestone. Rebuild properly, or watch your bridge become a monument to your failure. Then it was gone, leaving me alone on 60 feet of weathered stone with the smell of graves in my nostrils. I had 30 days to figure out how to kill something that was made of death itself. I spent that month learning everything I could about Irish bridge-building rituals, about blood mortar and binding sacrifices, about things engineering school never taught. What I found in dusty folklore books and immigrant journals gave me nightmares. But it also gave me a plan. The keeper was right about one thing. The bridge had been built with specific rituals, designed to create a supernatural binding between stone and bone. But like any structure, it had a weakness. And I'd found it in a 150-year-old letter from County Cork. On the last day of the month, I returned to Devil's Backbone Bridge with everything I needed. Not to rebuild it, but to complete it. Because I'd finally understood what the Irish builders had really been doing. They hadn't been feeding the keeper to make it strong. They'd been feeding it to keep it trapped. The bridge wasn't a home for the creature. It was a prison. And I'd accidentally damaged the bars when I renovated it. The ritual took 6 hours. I won't describe what I had to do, what I had to sacrifice to make the binding hold. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. But when it was finished, the keeper was back where it belonged, locked in stone and bone, unable to leave the bridge structure, unable to take anyone who didn't willingly step onto its domain. Disappearances stopped after that. Devil's Backbone Bridge stands today, solid and safe for day hikers and tourists. The Forest Service thinks my final renovation was my finest work, a perfect blend of historical preservation and modern engineering. They don't know about the fresh mortar I mixed with my own blood, about the bone fragments I carefully selected from evidence bags and Civil War battlefield relics, about the words I spoke in Irish Gaelic while the keeper screamed from inside the limestone blocks. I retired 6 months later, bad heart. Come on to play that we set for my new television, but they will be business as well. But the scheme just chelly the keepers a purper. I retired 6 months later. Come on to play that we start from the round a little ground. About the thirst words within Irish Gaelic, while the keeper screamed from inside the limestone blocks. I retired 6 months later, bad heart. Come on to play that we set for my new television, but they will be business as well. About the words I spoke in his on the first war blocks. They don't know about the fresh mortar I mixed and Civil War battlefield relics, about the words I spoke in Irish Gaelic, while the keeper screamed from inside the limestone blocks.
bad heart, I told them. Stress from all those mysterious accidents. But the truth is, I couldn't bear to look at that bridge anymore, knowing what lived inside it. Sometimes I drive up to the trailhead on winter mornings, when ice covers the stone and the gorge fills with mist. I can hear it then, if I listen carefully, the sound of grinding stone, muffled by mortar and bone and my own guilt. The bridge keeper is still there, still hungry, still waiting, but it's trapped now, bound by older magic than death. It can't hunt anymore, can't call people to their doom. Unless someone rebuilds the bridge again, unless some future engineer decides to modernize the stonework without understanding what they're really breaking. Left detailed notes in the Forest Service archives, buried deep in maintenance files where only another bridge builder would think to look. Warnings about proper construction techniques, about respecting historical preservation requirements, about never, ever disturbing the mortar joints on Devil's Backbone Bridge. Because some structures aren't built to last forever. Bandwidth, they're built to hold forever. And if that binding ever breaks completely, if the keeper ever gets free of its stone prison, God help us all. The bridge will be the least of our problems then.
My name is Clayton Fairfax, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, watched mountain lions stalk hikers, and tracked rabid coyotes through miles of Virginia wilderness. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what happened during the harvest moon of 2023. I work the George Washington National Forest, specifically the remote sections up in the Shenandoah Valley. It's beautiful country, rolling hills covered in oak and pine, crystal clear streams that run cold even in summer, and wildlife that still knows how to stay wild. I love this place like it's part of my soul. I'm what you'd call an old-school ranger. I started here right out of high school, working summers while I got my forestry degree. Before that, I spent my teenage years guiding hunting trips with my grandfather. He taught me to read tracks like words on a page, to move through the woods without making a sound, and to respect the animals even when you had to control them. That last part became my speciality, predator control and wildlife management. When a black bear gets too comfortable around campers, they call me. When coyotes start taking livestock from the farms that border our land, I'm the one who handles it. It's not always pretty work, but it's necessary. Nature needs balance, and sometimes humans have to help maintain it. I've always been practical about my job. No room for superstition when you're dealing with real predators that can kill real people. My grandfather used to tell stories about things in these mountains, shadow creatures and phantom hunters. But I figured those were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The trouble started in early October. I was making my usual rounds along the northwestern boundary when I found the first carcass. A full-grown white-tailed deer, a big buck that should have been in his prime. But something had torn him apart like he was made of paper. I crouched next to the remains, studying the damage. The wounds were strange, too clean for a bear, too savage for a mountain lion. Bears leave claw marks and crush bones. Big cats go for the throat and leave precise puncture wounds. This looked like something had simply exploded the deer from the inside out. Were even stranger, dog prints, but huge, bigger than any domestic breed I knew. And there were too many of them, like a whole pack had surrounded the deer. But we didn't have wolves in Virginia, and feral dog packs usually left messier kills. I took photos and measurements, then called it in to my supervisor, Janet Morrison. She'd been running this district for 12 years and had seen everything twice. Probably a feral pack, she said when I described the scene. You know how bad it's been getting? People dump their dogs when they can't afford them anymore, and they go wild fast. These prints are different, Janet, bigger, and the kill pattern. Karloff, Clayton, you're overthinking it. Just set up some trail cameras and see what comes back to feed. I did what she asked, but the feeling in my gut told me this was something new. I'd tracked hundreds of feral dogs over the years. They were dangerous, sure, but predictable. They hunted in familiar patterns, stuck to water sources, and left sign you could follow. These tracks just stopped, right at the edge of a small clearing, like whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air. Over the next week, I found 3 more kills. All deer, all torn apart the same way. The trail cameras captured nothing but empty forest, not even the normal wildlife that should have been drawn to the carrion. The locals started talking. Jim Hendricks, who ran cattle on the land next to ours, lost 2 calves, found them in his pasture, killed the same way as my deer. Sarah Martinez, who lived in a cabin about 5 miles from the park entrance, called to report strange howling at night. "It's not like any dog I've ever heard," she told me when I stopped by to check on her. "Sounds almost musical, like they're singing together." Sarah was in her 70s, had lived in these mountains her whole life. If she said something was different, I believed her. "When do you hear it?" I asked. "Just after midnight, usually. Started about a week ago. My old hound Rex won't even go outside anymore, just stays under the porch, shaking." Her property line for tracks. Dogs that could spook other dogs were dogs that needed to be dealt with quickly. While evening, I was filing my reports when my phone rang. It was Danny Caulfield, a local hunting guide I'd known since we were kids. "Confiscated Clay, you need to get up to Miller's Ridge tonight," he said without preamble. "Something killed 3 of my tracking dogs." My blood went cold. Danny's dogs were tough, experienced hunters trained to handle everything from wild boar to black bear. What happened? "I was running a blood trail from this morning's hunt, lost the wounded deer somewhere up near the old cemetery. My dog started acting strange around sunset, whining, trying to turn back. Then something came out of the trees. You see what it was? Dogs. Big ones, moving like shadows. My pack tried to run, but these things were faster. By the time I got my rifle up, 3 of mine were down, and the rest had scattered." Marrera's Ridge was deep forest, about 10 miles into the park. The old cemetery he mentioned was from the 1800s, when there used to be a settlement up there. Most folks avoided it after dark, though I'd never paid much attention to the local superstitions. "I'll head up there first thing tomorrow," I told him. "Clay," Danny's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "These weren't normal dogs. I've been hunting these woods for 30 years. I know every pack, every stray, every farm dog that runs loose. These things, they moved. Wrong, like they were floating instead of running." As I hung up, I sat in my truck for the darkening forest. The October air carried the smell of dying leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Somewhere in those trees, something was hunting. Something that killed deer like they were rabbits and spooked experienced hunting dogs. Checked my gear. Rifle, flashlight, first aid kit, radio. Tomorrow I'd head up to Miller's Ridge and see what kind of predator could take down 3 hunting dogs. As I drove home, the full moon was just starting to rise over the mountains, casting everything in silver light. The October harvest moon, my grandmother used to call it. She always said strange things happened when it was full. I was about to find out just how right she was. The next morning I met Danny at the Miller's Ridge trailhead just after sunrise. He looked like he hadn't slept much, his usually steady hands shaking slightly as he loaded gear into his pack. "You bring backup?" he asked, nodding toward my radio. "Janet knows where I am. You really think we need more people for a few feral dogs?" Danny gave me a look I couldn't read. "Clay, I've been doing this my whole life. Yesterday scared me more than anything I've seen in these woods." We hiked up the old logging road in silence. The morning was crisp and clear, with that golden light that only comes in October. Birds chirped in the trees, squirrels chattered as we passed. Normal forest sounds that made me feel better about the whole situation. The blood trail from Danny's wounded deer was easy to follow. Dark drops on fallen leaves, broken branches where the animal had pushed through thick brush. We found where it had died about 2 miles up, near a small stream. "This is where my dog started acting up," Danny said, pointing to a cluster of pine trees. "Right around here." Listeners, I knelt to examine the ground. The deer had bled out naturally, no sign of predator activity on the carcass itself, but the soil around it told a different story. Dog tracks, just like the ones I'd been finding all week. Huge paw prints that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as mysteriously. The doctors try to follow these tracks? That's the thing, they wouldn't go near them. Rex and Blue are fearless, but they took one sniff and backed away whining. That's when I knew something was really wrong. We followed the strange tracks deeper into the woods. They led us up a steep hillside, through stands of old-growth oak and maple. The normal forest sounds gradually faded until we were walking in eerie silence. The old cemetery sat in a small clearing at the top of the ridge. About 20 weathered headstones, most so old the names had worn away. A few wrought iron crosses leaned at odd angles. In the center stood a larger monument, some kind of memorial from the Civil War era. "This is where it happened," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. The scene was worse than I'd expected. Danny's 3 dogs lay scattered around the clearing, their bodies torn apart with the same savage precision I'd seen in the deer kills. But there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl. The remaining dogs' tracks showed they'd tried to run in 3 different directions, but the strange, oversized paw prints had somehow cut them off at every escape route, like the attackers had known exactly where each dog would go. "Danny, how many dogs did you say attacked yours?" "Hard to say. They moved so fast and it was getting dark. Maybe 6 or 7. I counted the tracks carefully. There were at least a dozen different sets of prints, maybe more. And they all seemed to converge on the cemetery from different directions, like the pack had surrounded the entire area before attacking. "We need to get out of here," I said, standing up. Something about this place felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. That's when we heard it. A low howl echoed through the trees, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. It was answered by another, then another, until the whole mountainside seemed to vibrate with the sound. Just like Sarah had described, musical, almost like singing. Danny grabbed my arm. "That's them. That's the same sound from yesterday." The howling was getting closer, and there was something about it that made every instinct I had scream danger. These weren't the normal calls of coyotes or feral dogs. This sounded organized, purposeful. "Move," I said, unslinging my rifle. "Back to the truck, now." We started down the hillside at a fast walk, trying not to run, but definitely not taking our time. The howling followed us, always seeming to come from just out of sight, but getting steadily closer. Escalating about halfway down, Danny stopped so suddenly I almost ran into him. "Clay, look." Through the trees ahead of us, shapes were moving. Dark forms that seemed to flow between the trunks like shadows given substance. They were keeping pace with us, but staying just far enough away that I couldn't get a clear look. "Confiscated," I whispered, raising my rifle. I count 5, no 6, maybe more behind them. The shapes moved wrong, just like Danny had said. Instead of the bounding gait of normal dogs, they seemed to glide over the forest floor. And they were big, easily the size of German shepherds, but built differently. Longer legs, narrower heads. I aimed at the closest one and squeezed the trigger. The rifle crack echoed through the trees, and I saw my shot hit dead center. The dark shape stumbled, then kept moving, like the bullet had passed right through it. "Did you see that?" Danny's voice was tight with fear. "I hit it. I know I hit it." But the creature showed no sign of injury. If anything, it seemed to be getting closer, and now I could see others moving to flank us on both sides. We broke into a run, of crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs, while those things paced us through the trees. I could hear them now. Not howling anymore, but a sound like heavy breathing mixed with something that might have been laughter. Every time I turned to look, they were right there at the edge of my vision.
dark shapes with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. When I raised my rifle again, they would fade back into the shadows, only to reappear somewhere else. Cruck, lungs burning, and threw ourselves inside. I gunned the engine and we tore down the dirt road, gravel flying from under the tires. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of them standing at the tree line, a whole pack of dark shapes watching us leave. They didn't chase the truck, just stood there like they were memorizing our scent. "What the hell were those things?" Danny gasped, still trying to catch his breath. Ket, I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. In 19 years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like them. Animals that moved like ghosts, that seemed to shrug off rifle bullets, that hunted with intelligence I'd never seen in any predator. Kemp, my cabin with every light on, cleaning my rifle and trying to make sense of what had happened. My hands were steady now, but I kept hearing that strange howling in my mind, musical and wild and somehow hungry. I called Janet and gave her a sanitized version of the day's events. Feral dog pack, more aggressive than usual. Recommend closing the Miller's Ridge area until we could organize a proper hunt. But as a phone, I knew this wasn't something that could be solved with normal wildlife management. It wasn't entirely natural. And tomorrow night was the full. The next day brought reports from all over the valley. 3-4 cattle killed at the Henderson farm. A now myself hiding hiker whose abandoned car was found near the Skyline Drive entrance, and something that made my blood run cold. This France-off morning, behind Did cabin as fast as my trike would take me. Cyril old head Rex, in a small 6's, the book spack or broad the closing the sock by disconsolate face, watching black eyes, Rex, her bone eye across, rapey ready, ABC whose Texas, 6 coaching with his porch, Bach, dog was golf, all with Christmas drawing, Trone. Inside this class of especially used spruggages in the dog's blackest 6 Dowd's word days crackled
At the Bear Mountain campground, multiple casualties. My heart sank. Bear Mountain was one of our most popular camping areas, especially during October when the leaves were changing. If those things had found a campground full of families, "On my way," I radioed back, but I knew I'd be too late to help. The scene at Bear Mountain was chaos. Ambulances, police cars, and Forest Service vehicles filled the parking area. Paramedics were loading someone into an ambulance, while others tended to injuries on the spot. Janet met me at the command post they'd set up near the ranger station. Her face was pale and tight with stress. "What happened?" I asked. "Pack of wild dogs hit the campground just before dawn. Family of 4 in Site 12. Parents are in the hospital. Kids." She shook her head. "The kids didn't make it." I felt sick. "Any witnesses?" "Tom Bradley was fishing at the lake when it started. Says he saw at least 8 or 10 dogs moving through the campground like they were following a plan. They hit 3 different campsites almost simultaneously." Tom Bradley was a local man in his 60s, an experienced outdoorsman who'd been camping these mountains since he was a boy. I found him sitting on a picnic table, smoking a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Tom, can you tell me what you saw?" He looked up at me with haunted eyes. "Clayton, I've lived here my whole life. I know every critter in these woods. What I saw this morning, that wasn't natural." "Tell me." "I was down at the water's edge, maybe 100 yards from the campground. Sun was just starting to come up, mist still on the lake. Then I heard this howling, like music, almost beautiful if you didn't know what was coming. The same musical howling Danny and I had heard at Miller's Ridge. They came out of the trees like smoke," Tom continued, "moving fast but silent, spreading out to surround the whole campground. I counted 10, maybe 12. Big as wolves but shaped wrong. Too long in the legs, heads too narrow." "What did you do?" "Grabbed my rifle and tried to get a shot, but they moved too fast. And when I did hit one..." He paused, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Bullet went right through, like shooting at fog. The same thing I'd experienced at Miller's Ridge. My rational mind kept trying to find explanations. Bad angle, missed shot,
adrenaline affecting my aim. But deep down, I was starting to accept a more disturbing possibility. The screaming started about then, Tom went on. People waking up to find those things tearing into their tents. I tried to help, but by the time I got there, it was over. Whole attack didn't last more than 5 minutes. Where did they go? Back into the woods. But here's the thing, Clayton. Just before they disappeared, I saw something else. A man on horseback, sitting at the edge of the trees, dressed all in black, with a horn hanging from his belt. I stared at him. A man? Wasn't really a man, I don't think. Sat too still, too straight. And his horse? Tom shuddered. Horse looked like it was made of shadow and bone. Chill down my spine. Which direction did they go? North, toward the old settlement ruins. But Clayton, there's something else. Before they left, that figure on horseback looked right at me. Didn't say anything, just looked. And I got the feeling this was just the beginning. Swallowed. I spent the rest of the day coordinating with local law enforcement and the county animal control officer. We organized hunting parties, set up roadblocks, and advised all residents to stay indoors after dark. But I knew none of it would help. These weren't normal predators that could be tracked and killed with conventional methods. They were something else entirely, something that followed rules I didn't understand. As evening approached, I found myself back at my cabin, studying every book I had on local wildlife and folklore. My grandfather's old journals were in a box in my closet, stories he'd collected from the old-timers back when he was guiding hunters in these mountains. Most of it was typical mountain lore, ghost stories and tall tales designed to entertain city folks around a campfire. But one entry made me stop cold. Old Man Cassidy told me about the Harvest Moon Pack today. Says they come every October when the moon is full, hunting souls for their master. Black dogs the size of wolves, led by a rider in black. Can't be killed by normal means because they ain't fully alive. Only way to stop them is to face the huntsman himself. But most who try don't come back. I read the entry 3 times, my hands trembling slightly. My grandfather had been a practical man, not given to superstition. If he'd written this down, he'd believed it was important. The rest of the entry was even more disturbing. Cassidy says the pack grows stronger each time they feed, and the huntsman can call living dogs to join his pack. Once they have enough souls, they'll ride permanent-like, instead of just during the full moon. Been building towards something for decades, waiting for the right time. Escalating. Active, the sun was setting, and the full harvest moon was rising over the mountains. Somewhere in those dark woods, things that shouldn't exist were preparing to hunt again. My phone rang. It was Danny. Clay, they took my remaining dogs. What? Found their collars in my yard, all torn up. But here's the weird part. They came willingly. I watched from my window as those shadow things called to them, and my dogs just followed them into the woods. I thought about Tom's story of the huntsman, my grandfather's notes about the pack growing stronger. Danny, get out of there. Pack a bag and go stay with relatives in town until this is over. What about you? My cabin window at the moonlit forest.
Whatever this thing was, it had been building to something for years, maybe decades. Taking souls, growing stronger, waiting for the right moment. And had a full harvest moon rising over the valley and a pack of supernatural hounds at its command. That moment had arrived. I'm going to end this, I said. I spent the next hour preparing like it was my last night on Earth. Maybe it was. I loaded my truck with everything I could think of, extra ammunition, flares, gasoline, even a few items from my grandfather's old hunting kit that I'd never understood before. Among his things was a small pouch of what looked like regular salt, but with a handwritten label, "Blessed by Father McKenna for the unnatural hunt." There was also an old hunting knife with strange symbols carved into the handle, and a silver whistle that was tarnished black with age. Any of it would help, but conventional weapons hadn't worked. It was time to try something else. My plan was simple.
Get to the old settlement ruins where Tom had seen them disappear. If my grandfather's journal was right, that's where the huntsman would make his stand. Face him directly. End this before more people died. The drive through the forest was like traveling through a nightmare. My headlights cut through absolute darkness, broken only by the silver glow of the full moon. Twice I had to stop as dark shapes crossed the road ahead of me. Too quick to be sure, but definitely the size and build of the creatures we'd been tracking. I parked at the end of the old mining road and continued on foot. The settlement ruins were about a mile through dense woods, following a trail that hadn't been maintained in decades. The air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of dying leaves and something else, something that smelled like old graves and wet earth. My flashlight beam seemed smaller than usual, swallowed up by the darkness that pressed in from all sides. I was halfway to the ruins when I heard them, howling, but closer than before, much closer. The musical sound seemed to come from every direction at once, echoing off the trees until I couldn't tell where it was originating. I clicked off my flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the moonlight. That's when I saw them. They were all around me, dark shapes moving between the trees with that same impossible, flowing gait. But now I could see them more clearly in the silver light. They were definitely dogs, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too tall, too thin, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. And some of them I recognized. Danny's tracking dogs. Rex, Sarah's old hound. Even what looked like pets from around the valley, their familiar shapes twisted into something predatory and alien. They weren't attacking, just surrounding me, herding me toward the settlement ruins like I was prey being driven toward a trap. But I kept walking anyway, because I understood now that this had been inevitable from the first moment I'd found those tracks. The huntsman was calling me. The ruins appeared ahead through the trees, stone foundations and crumbling chimneys that marked where families had tried to build lives in these mountains more than a century ago. In the center of the old settlement stood a single structure that was somehow still intact, a small stone building that might have been a church. And in front of it, mounted on a horse that seemed to be made of shadow and starlight, sat the huntsman. He was tall and thin, dressed in black that absorbed the moonlight. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel his attention on me like a physical weight. The horse beneath him pawed the ground restlessly, and I could see its breath steaming in the cold air, despite the fact that I was pretty sure it wasn't actually alive. The pack of hounds arranged themselves in a semicircle around us, their glowing eyes fixed on me with predatory hunger. I counted at least 20 now, maybe more. All the dogs that had disappeared over the past weeks, transformed into something that belonged more to nightmare than nature. Clayton Fairfax. The huntsman's voice carried clearly across the clearing, though I couldn't see his mouth move. I have been expecting you. Let them go, I said, gesturing toward the hounds. Whatever you want, it's with me. What I want? He seemed amused. I want what I have always wanted. The hunt. The chase. The moment when prey realizes it cannot escape. These aren't your hunting grounds. All grounds are mine, Ranger. I have hunted these mountains since before your grandfather's grandfather was born. Every October moon, I gather souls for my pack. And every year, it grows stronger. Firefight. I thought of the families at Bear Mountain, of Sarah Martinez and the missing hiker. Why? Because the hunt is eternal, and the pack must grow. Soon there will be enough of us to ride permanently, not just during the full moon. And then, his horse reared slightly, and for a moment I glimpsed the huntsman's face beneath the hat brim. It was human once, but so old and cold that humanity had burned away, leaving only hunger. Then we will hunt, not just in these mountains, but everywhere. I understood now. This wasn't just about a supernatural predator terrorizing one valley. This was something that had been building for generations, using our remote mountains as a breeding ground for an army of the damned. The people you've taken, I said. Where are they? Safe, waiting. When the pack is complete, they will join us willingly. Sarah Martinez already understands. She has seen what we offer, the eternal hunt, where you are always the hunter and never the prey. From somewhere in the ruins behind him, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. Sarah, but changed somehow, hollow and hungry. "Clayton, join us," she called. "It's beautiful here. No more fear, no more weakness. Just the hunt." Incarcerated's old restrictions, old whistle, and blew it as hard as I could. The sound that came out was nothing like I expected. Not the sharp blast of a normal whistle, but something deeper and more resonant. It echoed through the clearing like a bell, and for the first time since I'd seen him, the huntsman reacted. His horse shied backward, and several of the hounds whined and backed away. The sound seemed to physically hurt them. "Clever," the huntsman said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Your grandfather's tools, but do you know how to use them?" I pulled out the old hunting knife, its strange symbols catching the moonlight. The blade felt warm in my hand, almost alive. One way to find out. The huntsman raised his own weapon, a long spear that seemed to be made of the same shadow stuff as his horse. "You can try to fight, Ranger, but you are only one man, and we are legion." "Maybe," I said, opening my grandfather's pouch of blessed salt and pouring it in a circle around my feet. "But I know these mountains better than you do." I raised the knife and pressed its blade to my palm, letting my blood drop onto the salt circle. The moment the blood hit, the salt began to glow with a soft white light. The effect on the hounds was immediate. They backed away with yelps of pain, their eyes losing some of their hellish glow. Even the huntsman's horse reared and wheeled, forcing its rider to fight for control. "Impossible," the huntsman snarled. "You are not trained in the old ways." "No," I admitted, "but my grandfather was, and he left me everything I need." I stepped out of the salt circle and advanced on the huntsman, the glowing knife held ready. The hounds tried to intercept me, but every time they got close to the blessed blade, they yelped and backed away. The huntsman spurred his horse forward, leveling his shadow spear at my chest. But as he charged, I whistled again on my grandfather's instrument, and the sound seemed to tear through him like a physical blow. He staggered in his saddle, and I saw my chance. I lunged forward and drove the knife deep into his horse's flank. Creature screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with winter wind. Both horse and rider began to dissolve, becoming transparent as moonlight. "This is not over," the huntsman gasped as he faded. "The pack will endure. The hunt will continue." "Not here," I said. "Not in my mountains." The last thing I saw of him was his eyes, ancient and hungry, and filled with a rage that had been building for centuries. Then he was gone, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats fading into the distance. The hounds looking around as if waking from a dream. Then, one by one, they began to change back. Rex became just an old hound again, whimpering and confused. Danny's dogs shook their heads and looked around with normal, non-glowing eyes. From the ruins, Sarah Martinez emerged, looking dazed but human. Behind her came 3 other people, the missing hiker and 2 others I didn't recognize, probably taken during previous hunts. "Clayton?" Sarah's voice was weak, but her own again. "What happened? I remember following something into the woods and then... It's all confused after that." "It's over," I told her, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Come on, let's get everyone home." While official report listed the incident as a coordinated attack by an unusual pack of feral dogs driven to aggressive behavior by rabies exposure, the missing persons were found suffering from exposure and mild hypothermia after being lost in the woods for several days. Janet didn't question my story too closely. She'd been a ranger long enough to know that sometimes the mountains held secrets that didn't fit neatly into official paperwork. The important thing was that the attacks had stopped and the missing people were home safe. Danny got his surviving dogs back, though they were different afterward, more cautious, less willing to hunt at night. Rex never quite recovered his old confidence, preferring to stay close to Sarah's cabin rather than roaming the woods like he used to. Sarah herself remembered very little of her time with the pack. Fragments, she said, running through moonlit forests, feeling wild and free and hungry. She described it almost wistfully, like someone remembering a vivid dream they'd rather not wake up from. The families affected by the attacks at Bear Mountain received counseling and support from the county. The official story about rabid feral dogs was accepted, mostly because people needed an explanation they could understand and deal with. Knew better. 3 months later, I was going through more of my grandfather's papers when I found another journal entry, dated just a few years before he died. Saw the huntsman again last night, watching from the ridge above Miller's cemetery. Still there, still waiting. The binding holds for now, but it's not permanent. Each generation, someone from the family has to renew it. Someone who knows the old ways and has the will to face what lives in the dark. Hope Clayton's ready when his time comes. What I'd experienced wasn't a victory so much as a postponement. The huntsman was bound, not destroyed. Sent back to whatever realm spawned him, but not gone forever. And someday, maybe in another generation, maybe sooner, he'd try again. Why I'm writing this down, why I'm documenting everything that happened, including the parts that didn't make it into the official reports. Because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to be ready. I've started learning more about the old ways my grandfather mentioned. There are books hidden in the deep stacks of university libraries. People who still remember the stories their grandparents told. Knowledge that's been passed down through families who've lived in these mountains for generations. It's not easy knowledge. It comes with a price. Understanding that the world is stranger and more dangerous than most people ever suspect. Knowing that there are things in the dark that hunger for human souls and see us as nothing more than prey for their eternal hunts. But it's necessary knowledge, because the huntsman was right about one thing. He has been hunting these mountains since before any of us were born. And he'll be hunting them long after we're gone, unless someone stands ready to face him each time he returns. I've taken on that responsibility, just as my grandfather did before me, and his grandfather before him. It's a burden that runs in families, passed down through blood and bitter experience. Some nights, when the moon is full and the October wind howls through the trees, I can still hear them. Distant howling, musical and wild, echoing from somewhere just beyond the edge of the world. The hunt continues, even if it's moved to other grounds. And sometimes I find tracks near the old cemetery, huge paw prints that appear from nowhere and disappear just as mysteriously. Reminders that the binding holds, but nothing lasts forever. Retire, I'll pass these stories and tools on to whoever takes my place. Maybe another family member, maybe just someone with the right combination of knowledge and courage. Because these mountains need a guardian, someone who knows what lurks in the shadows and how to face it. Breached. The harvest moon still rises every October, casting its silver light over the Shenandoah Valley. Families still camp at Bear Mountain, hikers still walk the trails, and local dogs still chase rabbits through the underbrush. They can do all these things safely because they don't know what I know. They don't have to look over their shoulders or listen for musical howling in the distance. That's my job now. Gathers enough strength to return, I'll be waiting for him. After all, these are my mountains, and some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. The hunt continues, but so do the hunters. My name is Marcus Cumberland, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 17 years. That's long enough to see just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Lost hikers, bear encounters, storm damage, and the occasional tourist who thinks flip-flops are appropriate hiking gear. What I hadn't seen, until 3 weeks ago, was something that made me question everything I thought I knew about these hills. Widow's Peak, it's called that because of the overlook, a rocky outcrop that juts out from the mountainside like the prow of a ship. From up there, you can see for miles across the valley, all the way to the distant peaks that fade into blue-grey shadows. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. The cliff drops straight down for about 200 feet, and we lose someone there every couple of years, usually tourists who get too close to the edge, trying to get the perfect selfie. I know these trails better than my own backyard. Every switchback, every loose rock, every tree that might fall in a storm. After my wife Sarah died in that car accident 5 years ago, this job became everything to me. The mountains don't lie to you or leave you. They just are what they are, honest and unchanging. At least, that's what I used to think. The first sign something was wrong came the kigs of what everyone. The number the charts that working down with paintingful for my health, a Tuesday morning in late October. I was doing my usual rounds, checking the trail markers and picking up litter, when I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. Just silence, thick and heavy like a blanket. That's when I heard it. A sound like a different ship, not of many. A lair time like a work. The temperature of the grow was difficult to completely minder. That's when I heard it. Allow-just to the chails for both people build it not be platigit. The sounds without to the chails is pixen the trails with a night. The sound was made a little place, but then without them adjustedly. That was one of the world close the job. The person of the chails was be just always around. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was doing my work, the sound like a no ward and more before, at silent stop of the ground caps of the beginning job. That's when I heard it. The sound like a very insect is raiding the trails a help many take along. That's when I heard it. The sound like a no ward, but then without them adjustedly. The sound like a roten the trails was following completely minder. That was when I heard it, a lured time sound that the foction. The trails were grouped to work as the truth of the word. Pulling of litter, no squirrels chattering, a sound like someone crying, distant and mournful. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the rocks and trees. I stopped walking and listened hard, trying to figure out where it was coming from. In 17 years, I'd heard plenty of sounds in these woods. Coyotes, owls, even the occasional black bear. But this was different. This sounded human. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone out there need help?" The crying stopped immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. The normal forest sounds came rushing back. Birds started singing again. Leaves rustled in the breeze. It was like the mountains had been holding their breath and finally let it out. I spent the next hour searching the day text. The Chites had a work from the crowd. I found a state from the rest that was similar they noted in life. It was future day, which is way to the part of reflected. I spent the following harmony more, the crying search that was going to way he moved. It was the better form and to the obrity moment. I started trust the ground and weather supporter, but it was no long work. I spent the free moved and cheered in the grobe. I said the work form, but I didn't think that in the world, that was also be well now. It was fart, blocking again spent the next hour searching the area around the overlook, looking for any sign of someone in distress. I checked all the usual spots where people sometimes get stuck or hurt. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no dropped items. Just the normal wear patterns you'd expect on a popular hiking trail. I radioed back to the station and told them about it. My supervisor, Janet, just laughed. "Probably someone's dog got loose and was howling," she said. "You know how sounds carry up there?" Maybe she was right. But dogs don't sound like that. This was grief, pure and simple. The kind of crying you do when you've lost everything that matters. I should have trusted my instincts that day. Should have paid attention to how the animals had gone quiet, how the air itself felt different. But I've always been practical, logical,
I believe in what I can see and touch and prove. Banshees were Irish folklore, not Appalachian reality. That was my first mistake. The second incident happened 3 days later. I was leading a small group of hikers up to the overlook, a family from Florida with 2 teenage kids. The father kept making jokes about mountain people and deliverance country, which got under my skin, but I stayed professional, part of the job. We'd just reached the viewing area when the mother, Linda, suddenly grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. At first, just the usual sounds. Wind through the trees, a hawk circling somewhere overhead. Then I heard it again. That same mournful crying, but closer this time, much closer. "It sounds like someone's hurt," Linda said, looking around frantically. "Shouldn't we help them?" The teenage daughter, maybe 16 years old, was walking toward the edge of the cliff. Not the safe viewing area with the rail, but the actual edge where the rock drops away into nothing. "Emma, stop!" I called out, but she didn't seem to hear me. She kept walking, slowly, like she was sleepwalking. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring out at something in the valley below. I moved fast, grabbing her arm just as her foot reached the crumbling edge. A few loose rocks tumbled down into the abyss. "What?" Emma blinked, suddenly alert again. "What happened? Why are we so close to the edge?" "You were walking toward it," I said, pulling her back to safety. "Didn't you hear me calling?" She shook her head, confused. "I thought I heard someone calling my name. A woman's voice. She sounded so sad." The crying had stopped again. The family finished their visit quickly after that, the parents clearly shaken. As they headed back down the trail, I heard the father mutter something about weird mountain acoustics. But I knew it wasn't acoustics. Something was happening up here, something that defied logical explanation, and it was getting stronger. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the local library and started researching the history of Widow's Peak. What I found made my blood run cold. The librarian, Mrs. Hobbs, was in her 70s and had lived in these mountains her whole life. When I asked about Widow's Peak, her face went pale. "You've been hearing things up there, haven't you?" she said quietly. I nodded. "What do you know about it?" She led me to a back room filled with old newspapers and local history books. "Most folks don't like to talk about it," she said, pulling out a folder thick with yellowed clippings. "Bad for tourism. But my grandmother used to tell stories." The first newspaper article was dated 1892. The headline read, "Local woman loses 7th son to mountain tragedy." Below it was a grainy photograph of a woman in black mourning dress, her face gaunt with grief. Her name was Eliza Whitmore, Mrs. Hobbs explained. Lost all 7 of her boys over the course of 20 years. Mountain accidents, every one. Hunting mishaps, falls, drownings. The last one went over the cliff at what's now called Widow's Peak. I read the article carefully. Eliza had been found 3 days later at the bottom of the same cliff, apparently having thrown herself off in grief. But what caught my attention was a line near the end. Local residents report hearing sounds of weeping from the overlook in the days following the tragedy. "That's not the end of it," Mrs. Hobbs said, pulling out more clippings. "Look at this." She showed me a pattern that made my stomach clench. Over the past 130 years, there had been dozens of deaths at Widow's Peak. Falls, mostly, but also hunting accidents, and even a few unexplained drownings in the creek below. And before each death, witnesses reported the same thing, the sound of a woman crying. "Some folks say she's trying to warn people," Mrs. Hobbs whispered. "Others think she's calling them to join her. Either way, when you hear Eliza weeping, someone's about to die." I left the library with copies of everything she'd shown me, my head spinning. I'm a man of science, trained in first aid and wilderness rescue. I don't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't ignore the pattern or what I'd seen happen to Emma earlier that day. The next morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Marcus,
"We've got a missing hiker," Janet's voice crackled over the radio. 23-year-old male, went up to Widow's Peak yesterday evening and never came back. His girlfriend's been calling all night. I grabbed my gear and headed up the trail faster than I'd ever climbed it before. The missing hiker's name was David Chen, an experienced outdoorsman from Charlotte. According to his girlfriend, he'd wanted to catch the sunset from the overlook and planned to camp nearby for the night. I found his tent first, pitched in the designated camping area about a quarter-mile from the peak. Everything was in perfect order. Sleeping bag laid out, camp stove set up, food properly stored. No signs of a struggle or hasty departure. At the overlook, I found his camera sitting on the rock wall that marked the safe viewing area. The last photo on it showed the sunset over the valley, time-stamped at 6:47 p.m. Beautiful picture. He'd been a good photographer. I started calling his name, following the trail that led around the backside of the peak. That's when I heard it again, the crying. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right there with me, so close I could almost feel breath on my neck. "David!" I shouted. "David, can you hear me?" Forehead stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard
Something else. A weak voice calling for help. I found him on a ledge about 30 feet down the cliff face, conscious but badly hurt. His left leg was clearly broken, and he was bleeding from a head wound. By some miracle, he'd landed on the only ledge wide enough to catch him. A few feet in either direction, and he'd have fallen the full 200 feet. "Thank God," he gasped when he saw me. "I've been calling for hours." "What happened?" I asked, setting up my rescue gear. "I don't know. I was taking some night shots, staying well back from the edge like I always do. Then I heard this woman crying. It was so sad, so desperate. I thought someone had fallen and was calling for help." My hands froze on the rope. A woman crying? Yeah, I followed the sound, trying to find her. Next thing I knew, I was going over the edge. It's like I just walked right off. But that doesn't make sense. I'm not stupid. I know better than that. It took 2 hours to get him off that ledge and down to where the ambulance could reach him. As the EMTs loaded him into the truck, he grabbed my arm. "There was a woman," he insisted, his voice urgent despite the pain medication they'd given him. "I saw her just before I fell, standing right at the edge, wearing a long black dress. She was so sad, like she'd lost everything. I just wanted to help her." The EMTs exchanged glances. They probably thought he was hallucinating from the head injury. But I believed him. That night, I did something I'd never done before in 17 years of ranger work. I broke protocol and went back up to Widow's Peak alone, after dark. Before on the bench near the overlook and waited. Around midnight, when the moon was high and the forest was at its quietest, I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I turned around slowly. She was exactly as David had described her, tall and thin, wearing a long black dress that seemed to move in a wind I couldn't feel. Her face was pale as moonlight, with dark hollows where her eyes should be. And she was weeping, tears that caught the moonlight like silver. "Eliza?" I said quietly. She looked up at me, and I felt her grief like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. For a moment, I understood why people walked off that cliff. Her pain was so deep, so overwhelming, that ending it seemed like the only option. But then of Sarah, and how her death had nearly destroyed me. I knew that kind of loss. I knew how it could consume you if you let it. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry for what happened to your boys." The weeping stopped. Eliza tilted her head, studying me with those hollow eyes. Then she lifted one pale hand and pointed toward the cliff edge. At first, I didn't understand. Then I heard it. Voices, coming from somewhere down the trail. Hikers, heading up toward the overlook in the middle of the night. Eliza was trying to warn me. The voices belonged to 3 college students from Appalachian State, 2 guys and a girl who'd decided that hiking to Widow's Peak at night would be epic and totally Instagram-worthy. They were drunk, loud,
and completely unprepared for a night hike in the mountains. I intercepted them about halfway up the trail, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. "I'm Ranger Cumberland. I'm going to need you folks to turn around and head back down." The girl, who couldn't have been more than 20, laughed. "We're not doing anything wrong. It's a public trail, right?" "The trail closes at sunset," I explained, "and you're all clearly intoxicated. I can smell the alcohol from here." One of the guys, a big kid wearing a fraternity t-shirt, stepped forward aggressively. "Look, Grandpa, we're just trying to have some fun. Why don't you mind your own business?" "Is my business," I said firmly. "And right now, my business is keeping you alive." They argued for another 10 minutes, but eventually I convinced them to turn around. I escorted them all the way back to the parking area and made sure they got in their car. The designated driver, if you could call someone who'd only had a couple of beers designated, was sober enough to drive, barely. As their taillights disappeared down the mountain road, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know Eliza was there. "Thank you," I said quietly. When I looked back, she was gone. Confiscated, but that was just the beginning. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Each time, Eliza would appear to warn me of danger, hikers heading up in dangerous weather, an unstable tree that was about to fall across the trail, a black bear with cubs that had wandered too close to the camping area. Confiscated, she never spoke, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough to put me on high alert, and each time I was able to prevent what could have been a tragedy. I started to think of her as a partner, strange as that sounds. She was protecting these mountains just like I was, in her own way. The only difference was that her shift had started over a century ago and never ended. But then things got worse. As so with the Hendersons, a family from Georgia with 3 young kids. They'd come up for a weekend camping trip, and everything seemed normal at first. The kids were excited to see the overlook, asking typical kid questions about the mountains and the animals that lived there. When the youngest, a boy of maybe 7, suddenly went very still. "Do you hear the sad lady?" he asked. The parents looked confused, but I went cold all over. "What sad lady, buddy?" I asked, crouching down to his level. "She's crying over there." He pointed toward the cliff edge. "She wants us to come see." I couldn't hear anything, but I grabbed the boy's hand anyway. "Let's go back to your parents, okay?" That's when the fog started rolling in. I've seen mountain fog before. It's common this time of year. But this was different. It came too fast, too thick, and it seemed to move with purpose. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. "Everyone stay close," I called out. But when I turned around, the 7-year-old was gone. "Tommy!" his mother screamed. "Tommy, where are you?" I could hear him somewhere in the fog, calling back, "I'm coming, sad lady. I'm coming to help you." His voice was getting farther away, toward the cliff. I ran into the fog, shouting his name, but it was like trying to navigate through cotton. The fog seemed to muffle sound and distort direction. Every step felt dangerous. I couldn't tell how close I was to the edge. Then I heard Eliza's voice for the first time, clear as a bell through the mist. "The child! Save the child!" Forgiven her voice, I found Tommy standing right at the cliff's edge, his toes hanging over empty air. He was staring out into the fog with that same unfocused look I'd seen on Emma's face. I grabbed him and pulled him back just as the fog began to clear. "Why did you run off like that?" I asked, my heart still pounding. Tommy looked confused. "The sad lady told me to come. She said she wanted to show me where her little boys fell down." The Hendersons left immediately after that, the parents pale and shaken. Before they drove away, the father pulled me aside. "Has this happened before?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, it has." "What is it? What's out there?" I looked back at the overlook, where I could just barely make out a figure in black standing near the edge. "A mother who lost her children," I said, "and she doesn't want it to happen again." But I was wrong about what Eliza wanted. I wouldn't understand the truth until it was almost too late. Rose started 2 days later, when a group of paranormal investigators showed up. Those called themselves the Appalachian Ghost Hunters, and they'd driven down from Virginia after seeing some online posts about strange activity at Widow's Peak. 5 people with expensive cameras and recording equipment, convinced they were going to capture proof of the supernatural. I tried to talk them out of it, but they had all the proper permits and reservations. Legally, I couldn't stop them from camping at the designated site near the overlook. "We're professionals," their leader, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, assured me. "We've investigated dozens of reportedly haunted locations. We know how to be safe." That night, I stayed late at the ranger station, monitoring the radio and watching the weather reports. A storm was moving in from the west, bringing heavy rain and high winds. Perfect conditions for accidents. Around 11 p.m., the first call came through. "Ranger Cumberland," Dr. Chen's voice crackled with static. We're getting some unusual activity up here. Could you come up and take a look?" I grabbed my gear and headed up the trail with a sense of growing dread. The wind was already picking up, and I could see lightning flashing in the distance. I found the ghost hunters huddled around their equipment near the overlook, all of them looking spooked despite their claims of being professionals. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, showing me a digital recording device. "We've been getting EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, for the past hour. Listen." She played back the recording. Through the static, I could hear a woman's voice, faint but clear. "My boys. Where are my boys?" "That's not all," another investigator said, pointing to a thermal camera display. "We're reading a significant temperature drop right at the cliff edge. And look at this." The thermal display showed a human-shaped cold spot, standing exactly where I'd seen Eliza the night before. "You need to pack up and leave," I told them, "now. There's a storm coming, and this place isn't safe at night." "But this is exactly what we came for," Dr. Chen protested. "This is proof of paranormal activity. We can't leave now." That's when the weeping started. It was louder than I'd ever heard it before, echoing off the rocks and trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The investigators fumbled with their equipment, trying to record everything, but their machines started malfunctioning. Cameras shut off, recording devices emitted high-pitched squeals, and their thermal camera went completely white. The fog rolled in again, thick and unnatural, and I knew we were in serious trouble. "Everyone link arms," I shouted over the wind. "We're going down the trail together, right now." But when I looked around, one of the investigators was missing. A young man named Kevin, who'd been operating the audio equipment. Through the fog and wind, I could hear him calling out, "Hello? Ma'am? Are you all right? Do you need help?" He was walking toward the cliff, just like all the others. Leggings, I ran after him, but the fog was so thick I could barely see my own hands. I could hear Kevin's voice getting closer to the edge, and another voice answering him, a woman's voice, speaking words that chilled me to the bone. "Come to me, child. Come see where they fell. Come join my boys in the darkness." This wasn't Eliza trying to warn people away from danger. This was Eliza calling them home. I found Kevin standing at the very edge of the cliff, his feet planted on loose rocks that could give way at any moment. The fog swirled around him like a living thing, and in that fog, I could see her clearly for the first time. Eliza Whitmore wasn't just mourning her lost children, she was collecting new ones. Her face was no longer simply sad, it was hungry, desperate, twisted with a century of grief that had curdled into something dark and possessive. She stood behind Kevin, with her pale hands reaching toward him, whispering words that made him lean forward, closer to the drop. "Kevin, stop!" I shouted, but he couldn't hear me over her voice. I lunged forward and tackled him, pulling us both away from the edge, just as the rocks he'd been standing on crumbled and fell into the abyss below. Kevin blinked and looked around in confusion.
What happened? Where am I? Fog cleared suddenly, and Eliza was gone, but I could feel her anger like ice in my veins. She'd been so close to claiming another victim. I got the ghost hunters off the mountain that night, all of them shaken, and their equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. Dr. Chen tried to ask me questions about what I'd seen, but I just told them to drive carefully and never come back. Knew Eliza wouldn't give up. She'd been feeding on grief for over a century, adding to her collection of lost souls. Every person who'd fallen from Widow's Peak hadn't been an accident, they'd been adoptions. The next morning, I drove back to the library and found Mrs. Hobbs waiting for me with a grim expression. "You've seen her, haven't you?" she said. "Really seen her. She's not trying to warn people, she's hunting them." Mrs. Hobbs pulled out a box I hadn't seen before, filled with even older documents and photographs. "My grandmother knew the truth," she said quietly. "She was friends with Eliza Whitmore before the tragedy started." She showed me a photograph that made my stomach turn. It was Eliza with all 7 of her sons, taken sometime in the 1880s. But it wasn't the family portrait that disturbed me. It was what I could see in Eliza's eyes even then. A possessiveness, a desperate love that seemed almost hungry. "The boys didn't die in accidents," Mrs. Hobbs whispered. "Eliza killed them." The truth hit me like a physical blow. What? She couldn't bear the thought of them growing up, leaving her, starting families of their own. So she arranged accidents, made sure they'd be hers forever. When the last boy died, people started asking questions. That's when she threw herself off the cliff. Mrs. Hobbs showed me newspaper clippings that told a different story than the one I'd read before. Reports of strange behavior, of Eliza becoming increasingly protective and paranoid about her children. Neighbors who'd grown suspicious about the pattern of deaths. "But she didn't die," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Not really. She's been up there ever since, collecting new children to replace the ones she lost. People think she's warning them, but she's calling them, making them feel her grief so strongly that joining her seems like the only way to end the pain." I thought about all the times I'd seen her, all the people she'd tried to lure to their deaths. And I thought about something else, how I'd felt standing near her. That overwhelming sadness, that desire to just let go.
"Why hasn't someone stopped her before now?" I asked. Mrs. Hobbs looked at me sadly. "Who's going to believe a story like this? And she's careful. Takes one person every year or two, makes it look like accidents. Just enough to feed on their grief without drawing too much attention." But something had changed. Eliza was getting bolder, hungrier. The fog incidents, the multiple attempts in a single week. She was escalating. "She's getting stronger," I realized, "more desperate. Or maybe," Mrs. Hobbs said quietly, "she's found someone she wants more than the others." The implication hit me like ice water. I thought about how Eliza had first appeared to me, how she'd seemed to be helping, warning me of danger. She hadn't been protecting the mountain from visitors. She'd been protecting me from competition. That night, I made a decision that probably should have gotten me fired, but I was beyond caring about regulations. I hiked up to Widow's Peak alone, carrying something I'd borrowed from the library. A photograph of Eliza's real grave, located in the church cemetery 20 miles away. She was waiting for me at the overlook, standing where she always stood, looking out over the valley that had become her hunting ground. "Hello, Eliza," I said. She turned to face me, and for the first time she spoke directly to me, with words I could hear clearly. "You understand," she said, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "You know what it's like to lose everything." "I do," I admitted. "When Sarah died, I wanted to die too." "Then come to me." Eliza held out her hand. "Join us. Be my son. Be part of my family forever." "And what about all the others? The hikers, the families with children? Will you leave them alone?" Her face darkened. "They don't understand. They don't deserve what you and I have. They take their families for granted, never knowing how precious, how fragile love is. So you kill them." "I save them," she hissed. "I give them purpose. I make them mine." I pulled out the photograph of her grave and held it up. "Your boys aren't with you, Eliza. They never were. Look,
her headstone, and nearby 7 small graves. But the boys' graves were in the regular cemetery, with flowers that looked recently placed. Her grave was separate, isolated in a corner reserved for suicides and others deemed unworthy of consecrated ground. "Your sons are at peace," I said. "They're where they're supposed to be. You're the one who's lost." Eliza's face contorted with rage and denial. The wind picked up, and the fog began rolling in again, thicker than ever before. "No!" she screamed. "They're mine! My boys are mine, and you will be mine!" She rushed toward me, her form becoming more solid and real with each step. For a moment, I felt the full force of her grief and madness, the crushing weight of a mother's love twisted into something monstrous. But I thought of
Sarah, and I thought of all the people Eliza had killed over the years, and I stood my ground. "Your boys forgave you long ago," I said. "They're waiting for you to join them, but not here, not like this." The fog swirled around us, and in it I saw shapes, the spirits of all the people who died at Widow's Peak over the past century. Men, women, children, all trapped by Eliza's desperate need to build herself a family of the lost. "Let them go," I said. "Let them all go, and go to your real children." Eliza stopped, her hollow eyes fixed on mine. For a moment, the madness cleared, and I saw the broken woman beneath, a mother who'd lost everything and couldn't accept it. "Will they forgive me?" she whispered. "They already have," I said. "They've been waiting for you to forgive yourself." The fog began to lift, and one by one, the trapped spirits faded away, finally free to move on. Eliza looked around at her empty hunting ground, then back at me. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, her voice sounded peaceful. She faded away like morning mist, and I was alone on Widow's Peak. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Widow's Peak has been quiet. No mysterious fog, no crying in the wind, no hikers walking off cliffs in a trance. The place feels different now. Still beautiful, still dangerous in the way mountains always are, but no longer haunted. I filed my report as a series of equipment malfunctions and weather-related incidents. Janet accepted it without question. She's always trusted my judgment. The paranormal investigators posted some blurry videos online that didn't prove anything, and the story faded from the local news cycle within a few days. But I know what really happened up there. Mrs. Hobbs and I visited Eliza's grave the following weekend. The isolated plot looked different somehow, peaceful rather than abandoned. We left flowers for her and for her boys, and I said a prayer for all the souls that had been trapped at Widow's Peak over the years. I also think about Sarah more now, but in a different way. Before, my grief had been like Eliza's, possessive and angry, refusing to let go. Now I understand that loving someone doesn't mean keeping them trapped in your pain. It means letting them be at peace. I still work the same trails, still help lost hikers, and deal with bears and all the regular challenges of ranger life. But I pay attention to things I used to dismiss. The way animals behave, the feeling of a place, the stories locals tell about strange occurrences. Because I learned something important up on Widow's Peak. The line between helping and haunting is thinner than we like to think. Love can save people, but it can also destroy them if it becomes twisted by grief and desperation. Yesterday, a young couple asked me about the history of the Overlook while I was checking trail conditions. I told them it was a beautiful spot for photographs, but to be careful. Near the edge. I didn't mention the ghost stories. Some stories are better left buried. But at night, when I'm finishing my rounds, I swear I can still hear something in the wind. Not crying this time, but something softer. Almost like a mother singing a lullaby to children who can finally sleep. And that's a sound I don't mind hearing at all. My name is Silas Grayson, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I know these caves better than most people know their own backyards. The Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky has been my home since I was 24, fresh out of college with a geology degree and big dreams about discovering new species in the deep places under the earth. I should have been what I wished for. People always asked me why I chose caves over mountains or lakes. The truth is, caves chose me. There's something about the quiet down there, the way sound travels and echoes, the cool air that never changes temperature. It's like stepping into another world, one that's been waiting millions of years for you to find it. The Mammoth Cave system where I work is huge, over 400 miles of mapped tunnels, and we find new ones every year. Most tourists stick to the easy paths with lights and railings, but my job takes me into the wild caves, the ones where you need ropes and headlamps and years of training just to survive. I've pulled out lost hikers, rescued stuck cavers, and mapped passages that no human had ever seen before. In all those years, the scariest thing I'd encountered was a black bear that wandered into one of the shallow caves during winter. Even then, the bear was more afraid of me than I was of it. I believed in science. Cave creatures were just animals that had adapted to life underground. Blind fish, colorless salamanders, bats. Evolution, not monsters. The old stories that local families told around campfires were just that, stories. Ways to keep kids from wandering into dangerous places. It was before the morning Deputy Sarah Chen called me about the missing college students. 3 kids from Eastern Kentucky University, she said over my radio, went into the cave system 2 days ago. They had permits for the tourist areas only, but their car's been sitting at the Mammoth Gap entrance since Tuesday. Unless Mammoth Gap. It was one of the deeper sections, not exactly dangerous for experienced cavers, but definitely not somewhere college kids should go without a guide. The entrance was a narrow crack between 2 limestone walls, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Any sign of them in the main chambers? I asked, already loading my gear into the truck. We've been calling down the main passages for hours. No response. That worried me. Sound carries well in caves. If they were hurt but conscious, they should have heard the search calls. If they couldn't respond, that meant they were either too far down to hear us, or something bad had happened. I met Deputy Chen at the Gap entrance an hour later. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from dealing with something outside your normal experience. 2 other rangers were already there, Marcus Webb and Jennifer Park, both good people I'd worked with many times. What do we know about the
kids? I asked. Calcium geology students, Chen said, checking her notepad.
Emily Rodriguez, age 20, David Kim, age 19, and Tyler Manning, age 21. Their professor said they were excited about finding some kind of mineral formation for their final project. Any idea which way they went once they got inside? Rasklet spoke up. We found footprints heading toward the lower passages, 3 sets, heading down. That made my stomach tighten. The lower passages in Mammoth Gap went deep, connecting to unmapped sections of the cave system. Some of those tunnels had never been fully explored, even by experienced cavers like me. They were on our list of places to map eventually, when we had time and funding. Could they have gotten lost? Deputy Chen asked. Possible, I said, but geology students usually know enough to stay on marked paths, and they would have brought flashlights, maybe even backup lights. What I didn't say was that experienced cavers had gotten lost in those lower passages before. 2 years ago, a team of experts from the National Speleological Society had spent 3 days mapping one section and came back with stories about passages that seemed to change direction, chambers that felt bigger than their lights could reach, and strange echoes that didn't match the cave formations they were seeing. They'd also mentioned sounds, not water dripping or rocks settling, the normal cave sounds I knew by heart. These were different, scratching sounds, and sometimes, if they listened carefully, something that almost sounded like whispering. I chalked it up to imagination and adrenaline. Caves could play tricks on your mind, especially when you were tired and stressed. The darkness was so complete that your brain started making up things to fill the empty space. But now, with 3 kids missing in those same passages, Those stories didn't seem so easy to dismiss. "We'll start with the main chambers," I told the group. "Standard search pattern. Stay in radio contact. If we don't find them in the upper levels, we'll have to consider going deeper." Jennifer looked at me with concern. "How deep are we talking about?" I strapped on my helmet and checked my headlamp batteries. Let's hope we don't have to find out. Their first hour of searching went exactly like I expected. We swept through the main tourist chambers, calling out the students' names, listening for responses. The echo of our voices bounced off limestone walls that had been forming for millions of years, but no human voices echoed back. Fulton found something in the cathedral chamber, a granola bar wrapper and an empty water bottle, both recent. "They definitely came this way," he said, bagging the trash as evidence. "That's the path toward the lower passages," Jennifer noted, consulting her map. I studied the cave floor with my headlamp. The limestone was hard, not great for holding footprints, but I could see scuff, marks and disturbed sediment leading toward the tunnel that dropped down into the deeper system. "Radio check," I called. "Marcus, clear?" "Jennifer, clear." "Deputy Chen, clear." "We're going down to level 2. Everyone stays together. Watch your footing. Some of these passages get narrow." The descent into was entering a different world. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. The air got thinner, and the silence became so complete that you could hear your own heartbeat echoing off the walls. We'd gone maybe 200 yards when Marcus stopped suddenly. "Silas," he said quietly, "look at this." "He's something on the cave wall." At first, I thought it was just a natural formation. Limestone could create all kinds of weird shapes. But as I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. Scratches. Deep gouges in the rock, running vertically down the wall for about 4 feet. They were too regular to be natural, too deep to be made by normal cave animals. "What could do that?" Jennifer whispered. I ran my fingers over the marks. The stone was hard limestone. It would take serious force to carve grooves this deep. "Maybe mining equipment," I said, though I knew there had never been any mining operations in this part of the cave system. "Look here," Deputy Chen called from further down the passage. She was standing next to another set of scratches, these ones on both walls of a narrow section. Whatever had made them was big enough to reach both sides of the tunnel at the same time. We kept moving, but now everyone was more alert. Our headlamps swept back and forth, looking for more signs. We found them, more scratches, disturbed sediment on the cave floor, and in one chamber, something that made us all stop cold. It was a pile of bones. Old bones, bleached white by time and cave minerals. Most were from animals. I recognized deer, raccoon, maybe some smaller mammals. But mixed in with the animal bones were others. Longer ones, thicker ones. "Are those?" Jennifer started to ask. "Human," I confirmed, "but old, really old." Deputy Chen was already on her radio, calling for backup and a forensic team. But I was more concerned about the fresh tracks I'd noticed leading away from the bone pile. "Everyone stay calm," I said. "These bones are ancient. Whatever left them here has been gone for decades." That's when we heard the sound. It started as a whisper, so quiet I thought it might be air moving through the cave passages. But then it got louder, and I realized it wasn't air at all. It was voices, human voices, but wrong somehow. Too high-pitched, with weird rhythms that didn't sound like any language I knew. "The students?" Marcus whispered. I held up my hand for silence. We all listened. The voices were coming from deeper in the cave, from passages that weren't on any of our maps. They rose and fell like singing, but the melody was unlike anything I'd ever heard. "Emily!" I called out. "David! Tyler! Can you hear us?" The singing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was holding its breath. Then we heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like something scraping across stone. Something big, moving fast through the darkness beyond our lights. "Stay together," I ordered. "Lights on the passages ahead." washed. Our 4 headlamps created a small circle of visibility in the vast darkness. Beyond that circle, anything could be waiting. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. It seemed to be moving in a circle around us, staying just outside our light. "What is it?" Deputy Chen whispered, her hand moving to her service weapon. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to keep moving. The students might need help." We advanced deeper into the cave system, following the passage that led toward the mysterious voices we'd heard. Every few steps we'd hear that scraping sound again, sometimes from ahead, sometimes from behind. Whatever was making it seemed to be following us. The passage began to narrow, forcing us to move single file. I took the lead, with Marcus behind me, then Jennifer, then Deputy Chen bringing up the rear. Our lights cast crazy shadows on the cave walls, making every rock formation look like a crouching figure. That's when Deputy Chen screamed. I spun around to see her on the ground, her flashlight spinning away into the darkness. Something had grabbed her ankle and was dragging her backward, away from our group. "Wen Chen!" I shouted, lunging toward her. In the wild beam of her spinning flashlight, I caught a glimpse of what had her. It was pale, almost white, with long, thin arms that seemed too long for any normal human body. Its face was turned away from the light, but I could see that its head was the wrong shape, elongated somehow. Marcus and Jennifer were both moving to help, but the thing released Deputy Chen suddenly and scrambled away into the darkness, with a speed that didn't seem possible. It moved like a spider, all arms and legs, disappearing into a crack in the cave wall that looked too small for anything human-sized to fit through. Deputy Chen was gasping, clutching her ankle. "Did you see it?" she panted. "Did you see that thing?" Locking. I helped her to her feet. Her ankle seemed okay, shaken but not twisted. But the look of absolute terror on her face told me she'd seen something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "What was it?" Jennifer asked. I didn't have an answer. In 14 years of cave work, I'd never seen anything like what had just grabbed Deputy Chen. It was human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Too pale, too thin, moving in ways that human joints shouldn't allow. And somewhere deeper in the cave, 3 college students were lost in the same darkness with whatever that thing was. "We need backup," I said into my radio. "Now!" Blackjack never came. Our radios had been working fine in the upper caves, but now we were getting nothing but static. The limestone walls were too thick, the passages too deep. We were on our own. Deputy Chen's ankle was sore, but she could walk. More importantly, she was determined to keep going. "Those kids are down here somewhere," she said grimly. "We can't just leave them." Respect, I was starting to think we might need to retreat and come back with a larger team. The problem was, by the time we got organized and returned, the students could be dead, if they weren't already. We'd been underground for 3 hours when we found the first real sign of the missing students. It was David Kim's backpack, torn open and scattered across the floor of a narrow chamber. His textbooks were everywhere, pages torn out and crumpled. His water bottle was there, but empty. Most disturbing, his emergency whistle was broken in half. Why would someone break his whistle? Marcus wondered. I picked up the pieces. The metal looked like it had been bitten through. "Maybe it wasn't someone," I said quietly. Jennifer was examining the torn backpack with her light. "Silas, look at this." The fabric wasn't just torn, it was shredded, like something with very sharp claws had ripped it apart. But mixed in with the claw marks were what looked like bite marks. Human-sized teeth, but wrong somehow. Too pointed, too many of them. We gathered up what we could of David's belongings and kept moving. The passage ahead split into 3 different tunnels. I'd been in this part of the cave system before, but only briefly. 2 of the tunnels led to dead ends. The third went deeper into unmapped territory. "Which way?" Marcus asked. I was studying the ground for tracks when Deputy Chen grabbed my arm. "Listen," she whispered. From somewhere ahead came a sound that made my blood freeze. It was crying. Human crying, but with a strange echo that made it sound like multiple voices crying at once. "Emily Rodriguez?" I called out.
Is that you?" The crying stopped immediately. Then, from the deepest tunnel, we heard a voice. "Help me!" It was definitely human, definitely female. But the voice was weak, strained, like someone who had been screaming for a long time. We headed toward the voice, moving as fast as we dared on the uneven cave floor. The tunnel sloped downward sharply, and our lights showed that it opened into a large chamber ahead. "Emily!" Deputy Chen called. "We're coming!" "Hurry!" came the voice from the darkness ahead. "Please, hurry!" We emerged into a cavern that was bigger than anything I'd seen in this part of the cave system. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. Somewhere in that vast darkness, water was dripping steadily. "Emily, keep talking," I said. "We need to find you." "I'm here," the voice said. "I'm
Hurt. I can't move."
We spread out, sweeping the chamber with our lights. The cavern was filled with rock formations, stalagmites and flowstone that had been growing for thousands of years. Any of them could hide a person. Marcus found her first. "Over here!" Emily Rodriguez was lying behind a large flowstone formation, partially hidden from view. She was conscious but clearly in pain. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and there was dried blood on her arms and face. Billing, "Emily, I'm Silas Grayson, Park Ranger," I said, kneeling beside her. "Where are David and Tyler?" "They took them," she whispered. "The pale things. They took them deeper." "What pale things?" Deputy Chen asked gently. "They live down here," Emily said, her voice shaking. "In the deep caves. They've been watching us since we came down. At first we thought we were imagining things, but then they started following us, making noises, calling to us in voices that sounded almost human. I was checking her injuries while she talked. Cuts and bruises, but nothing immediately life-threatening. The blood on her face was from scratches, probably from trying to crawl through tight spaces. "How long ago did they take David and Tyler?" I asked. "Hours, maybe yesterday. I've been hiding here, trying to stay quiet. But I could hear them calling my name, trying to get me to come out." Jennifer was standing guard, her light sweeping the chamber around us. "Silas," she said urgently, "we need to go, now." I looked up to see what had alarmed her. At the edge of our light, barely visible, shapes were moving. Multiple shapes, staying just outside the range of our headlamps, but definitely there, watching us. "How many are there?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Emily sobbed. "I've seen at least 6 or 7 different ones. They're all pale, like they've never seen sunlight. And they move wrong, like their joints bend in directions they shouldn't." One of the shapes moved closer, just for a second, and I got a better look. It was humanoid but stretched out, like someone had taken a normal person and pulled them longer. Its arms reached almost to the ground. Its face was pale and narrow, with dark hollows where the eyes should be. And it was looking right at us. "Can you walk?" I asked Emily. "I think so, but they won't let us leave. Every time I tried to go back the way we came, they herded me deeper into the caves." That explained why our search of the upper levels had found no trace of the students. Whatever these things were, they were intelligent enough to drive people away from the exits. "We stick together," I said. "Emily, stay between Marcus and me. Deputy Chen, Jennifer, watch our backs. We're going to move slowly toward the tunnel we came from." We helped Emily to her feet and began moving across the chamber. The shapes at the edge of our light kept pace with us, staying in the darkness, but never losing sight of us. I counted at least 8 separate figures. We're halfway back to the tunnel entrance when one of them spoke. "Stay," it said, in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "Stay with us." Human, but not quite. Like someone had learned to speak by listening to humans from a distance, but had never quite got it right. "Go to hell," Deputy Chen muttered, but I could hear the fear in her voice. More voices joined in, coming from all around the chamber. "Stay, stay, stay!" The word echoed off the cave walls, multiplying until it sounded like dozens of voices chanting. Then they attacked. The first one came from above, dropping from the cave ceiling where it had been clinging like some huge spider. It landed on Marcus, knocking him down. His headlamp went spinning across the cave floor. In the chaos of moving lights and shadows, I saw more of them rushing toward us. They moved incredibly fast, scrambling over the rock formations like they weighed nothing. Their pale skin seemed to glow in our lights. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Emily toward the tunnel. But as we reached the entrance, more pale figures emerged from the darkness ahead. They had been waiting for us, blocking our escape route. We were trapped in the chamber with creatures that shouldn't exist, and somewhere in the deeper caves, 2 college students were in the hands of these things. That's when I heard Tyler Manning screaming. Tyler's screams echoed through the cavern from somewhere far below, and the sound was so filled with agony that it made my knees weak. The pale creatures around us went still when they heard it, their heads turning toward the sound, like animals hearing a dinner bell. "We have to help him," Emily sobbed. But the creatures had other plans. The one that had dropped onto Marcus was crouched over him, holding him down with those impossibly long arms. Up close I could see it better. Its skin was translucent, showing dark veins underneath. Its eyes were huge and black, adapted for life in complete darkness. And its mouth was wrong, too wide, filled with sharp teeth that looked designed for tearing meat. "Let him go!" I shouted, shining my light directly at the creature. It hissed and released Marcus, scrambling back into the shadows. Marcus rolled away, gasping. His jacket was torn where the thing's claws had grabbed him, but he seemed okay. They don't like bright light, I realized. "Everyone, keep your lights on them." We formed a circle, backs together, pointing our headlamps outward. The creatures retreated but didn't leave. They stayed at the edge of our lights, circling us like wolves around a campfire. Topelled Tyler screamed again, closer this time. "They're bringing him here," Emily whispered. "They always bring them here before—" "Before what?" Deputy Chen demanded. Emily's face was white with terror. "Before they feed." That's when I understood what I was looking at. These weren't just cave creatures that had evolved to live underground. They were humans who had been living in the deep caves for so long that they'd changed. Generations of them, maybe centuries, adapting to life in complete darkness, becoming something that was no longer quite human. Ibbles. The bone pile we'd found earlier wasn't from animals. It was from people who had wandered too deep into the caves over the years. Hikers, cavers, anyone unlucky enough to get lost in the deep passages and stumble into their territory. "How long have they been down here?" I asked Emily. "I don't know. But they know things about the caves that aren't on any maps. Secret passages, chambers that connect to other cave systems. This whole underground area is like their hunting ground." 2 more the main tunnel entrance, dragging something between them. As they moved into our light, I saw it was Tyler Manning. He was conscious but badly hurt, his clothes torn, bleeding from multiple cuts. "Let him go!" I called out. One of the creatures, larger than the others, with longer arms and more pronounced features, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was clearer than the others, as if it had learned human speech better. "You are in our home," it said. "You will stay. Feed us. Feed our young." "Your young?" Marcus gasped. "Confiscated." The creature gestured toward the deeper passages. From the darkness came smaller shapes, juvenile versions of the pale creatures. They were even more disturbing than the adults, with oversized heads and eyes that seemed too big for their skulls. "Caves provide," the large creature continued. "Lost ones come down. We take them. We live." Confiscated our chances. 4 humans with flashlights against at least a dozen of these things, in their territory, with no backup coming. The odds weren't good. But then I remembered something from my geology training. These caves were formed by underground rivers. And underground rivers meant... "Everyone," I said quietly. "When I say run, head for that passage." I pointed to a narrow opening on the far side of the chamber. "Trust me." "That leads deeper into the caves," Emily protested. "I know, but it also leads to water."
The creatures were getting bolder, moving closer despite our lights. Tyler was barely conscious, and I could see more blood on his clothes. We needed to move soon, or we'd all end up like the bones in the pile. Acknowledgement, the lead creature commanded its pack. Take the females first, males can wait. Bandwidth, that was when Deputy Chen surprised everyone. Instead of backing away, she pulled out her service pistol and fired 3 shots at the ceiling above the creatures. The gunshots were deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off the cave walls like thunder. The creatures shrieked and scattered, their sensitive ears overwhelmed by the noise. Several of them dropped Tyler and ran for the shadows. "Now!" I shouted. "Run!" We grabbed Tyler and Emily and ran for the narrow passage I'd spotted. Behind us, the creatures were recovering from the gunshots, and I could hear them coming after us. Their feet made scratching sounds on the stone as they scrambled to follow, tight, forcing us to move single file. I led the way, with Emily and Tyler behind me, then Marcus and Jennifer, with Deputy Chen bringing up the rear. Our lights bounced crazily as we ran, creating a strobe effect that made everything look like a nightmare. "I can hear water ahead," Marcus called out. He was right. The sound of running water was getting louder, and the passage was starting to slope downward sharply. We emerged into another chamber, this one filled with the sound of rushing water. My light found it, an underground river flowing through the cavern, deep and fast. The water connects to other cave systems, I explained quickly. It eventually comes out at springs miles from here. If we can follow it... "Are you crazy?" Jennifer gasped. "Underground rivers are deadly." Behind us, the pale creatures were catching up. I could see their lights bobbing in the narrow passage. "More deadly than staying here?" I asked. Tyler was barely standing, supported by Emily and Marcus. His injuries were worse than I'd first thought, deep cuts that wouldn't stop bleeding. "I can't swim," he mumbled through swollen lips. "Confiscated." "You won't have to," I promised, though I wasn't sure that was true. The creatures emerged from the passage behind us, moving more cautiously in this new chamber. The sound of the water seemed to make them nervous. "The river goes deep," the large creature called to us. "You will drown. Stay here. We will make it quick." "How considerate," Deputy Chen muttered, reloading her pistol. Blazing, I was studying the river, trying to judge its speed and depth. It was moving fast, but there were rocks and ledges along the sides. If we were careful, we might be able to follow it downstream without getting swept away. Or we might all die in the dark water. Blinking at the pale creatures advancing toward us, their black eyes reflecting our lights like mirrors, I knew staying wasn't an option. "Everyone hold hands," I ordered. "We stay together no matter what. Follow the ledges along the side as long as possible. If you fall in, don't fight the current. Let it carry you downstream." "This is insane," Marcus said. "Insanity is our best option right now." I went first, stepping carefully onto a narrow ledge that ran along the river's edge. The rocks were slippery with moisture and algae. Emily came next, then Tyler supported by Marcus, then Jennifer and Deputy Chen. Behind us, the creatures had reached the water's edge, but they weren't following. They stood at the bank, watching us with those huge dark eyes, making clicking sounds that echoed off the cave walls. "They're not
"Coming," Emily said with relief. "They don't need to," I realized with growing horror. "They know where this river goes." But it was too late to turn back. The ledge was crumbling under our weight, and Tyler slipped. Marcus tried to catch him but lost his own footing. Both of them fell into the dark water and disappeared beneath the surface. The underground river swept us all away into the blackness, toward whatever waited downstream. Contingency. The underground river carried us through passages I'd never seen before, through chambers that felt vast and empty in the darkness. Tyler and Marcus surfaced after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, gasping and choking on the cold cave water. We managed to grab onto rocks and pull ourselves to a narrow beach in a chamber where the river slowed. Everyone was soaked, cold, and exhausted. Our flashlights had survived the water, but barely.
Jennifer's was flickering, and Deputy Chen's was completely dead. "Where are we?" Emily asked, her teeth chattering. I studied the caves around us with my light. The limestone was different here, older, more weathered. "I think we're in the Devil's Canyon system," I said, "about 3 miles from where we started." Tyler was in bad shape. The cuts from the creatures had reopened in the water, and he was losing blood. We needed to get him medical attention soon. "Can you walk?" I asked him. "I think so," he said weakly. "Those things, what were they?" "Humans," I said quietly, "or what humans become when they live in the deep caves too long, cut off from sunlight, from normal food sources. Generations of them, adapting to survive underground." "How is that possible?" Marcus demanded. "Cave systems like this one have been here for millions of years. Humans have been in Kentucky for thousands. If a group got trapped or lost in the deep caves and somehow survived, over time, isolation and environment could change them. Evolution in action." "But they were intelligent," Deputy Chen said. "They could talk, plan, coordinate attacks." "Intelligence doesn't disappear. It just adapts. They've probably been hunting people who wander into the deep caves for generations. Tourists, cavers, anyone who gets lost." We followed the underground river for another hour before finding a passage that led upward. My legs were shaking with exhaustion by the time we saw real sunlight filtering down through cracks in the cave ceiling. The exit was a narrow opening that came out near Devil's Canyon State Park, miles from where we'd entered the caves. It took 3 more hours to hike back to civilization and get Tyler to a hospital. The official report listed the incident as a cave rescue with unknown animal encounter. Deputy Chen and I decided that was the safest description. Who would believe the truth? And more importantly, who should know the truth? Tyler recovered from his injuries, though he never talked about.
What happened in the deep caves?
David Kim's body was never found. The official cause of death was listed as a caving accident. Unanswered. I've been back to the Mammoth Gap system several times since then, always with full teams and always staying in the mapped passages. We've sealed off some of the deeper entrances with steel grates and warning signs. The official reason is dangerous cave conditions. While your reason is to keep people out and to keep other things in. Sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing cave maps or planning safety protocols, I think about those pale creatures living in the deep tunnels beneath Kentucky. I wonder how many of them there are, how far their territory extends, how many people have disappeared over the years without anyone making the connection. And I wonder if sealing off a few entrances will really be enough to contain them. Last month, a family camping near Devil's Canyon reported hearing voices underground, human voices calling for help from somewhere beneath their campsite. The local sheriff asked me to investigate. I told him it was probably just wind through the cave passages. Sound can carry strange ways underground. But I've requested additional funding for more cave monitoring equipment, and I've started carrying a backup flashlight and a gun, because I know the truth that I can never put in any official report. There are things living in the deep places under the earth that used to be human. They're hungry, they're intelligent, and they're waiting in the darkness for the next lost soul to wander too far from the light. Some caves are better left unexplored. The missing student posters for David Kim are still hanging in the geology building at Eastern Kentucky University. His parents still call sometimes, hoping for news. I always tell them we're still looking, still checking new passages as we map them. But I know we'll never find David Kim, at least, not the way his parents hope. He's down there in the deep caves now, with the pale things that used to be human. And someday, when his transformation is complete, he might be the one calling to the next group of lost students who venture too deep into the darkness. That's the thing about caves. Once they claim you, you never really leave. My name is Silas Grayson, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I protect people from the dangers they can see. Unstable rocks, flash floods, getting lost on marked trails. But the greatest dangers are the ones hiding in the deep places, waiting in darkness so complete that it changes everything it touches. Leap with a light on now, and I always will.
My name is Obadiah Thornfield, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. Most folks call me Obi. I work the Black Balsam Knob section of Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, where the mountains roll like green waves and the trees whisper secrets older than memory. I wasn't always a ranger. Started out in seminary, studying to be a preacher like my daddy wanted. But something about those endless hours in dusty classrooms, memorizing verses about demons and angels, never sat right with me. The real world was outside those walls, in the honest work of protecting God's creation. So I traded my Bible for a badge and never looked back. Well, almost never. The morning everything changed started like any other October day. Mist hung thick between the trees, and my boots crunched through leaves painted every shade of fire. I was checking the trails near Devil's Courthouse, a rock formation that got its name from old Cherokee stories I never paid much mind to. Stories were just that. Stories. Obi, you copy. Go ahead, Sarah. Sarah Martinez ran dispatch from the ranger station. Good woman, mother of 3, level-headed as they come. Got a call about some vandalism up your way. Hiker says someone's been carving up trees near the old logging road. Might be kids again. I sighed. Every fall we got teenagers thinking they were the first ones to discover beer and pocket knives. I'll check it out. Which trail? About 2 miles up from the Devil's Courthouse parking area. Caller said it looked weird. Weird how? She just said weird, Obi. City folks, you know? Confiscated. People from Charlotte or Atlanta came up here expecting Disney World with trees. Everything looked weird to them. A hawk's cry, the way shadows moved in the wind, the simple fact that not every square inch of earth had been paved over. The hike took me through familiar territory. I'd walked these paths thousands of times, knew every root and rock. The forest was my church now, and I was its keeper. Pine needles carpeted the trail, still damp from morning dew. Somewhere above, a woodpecker hammered against dead bark. But as I climbed higher, something felt different. Psychologist animals were too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest, but the tense silence that comes before a storm. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone somewhere else. I found the damaged trees about where Sarah said I would. 3 old oaks, each one carved deep. But this wasn't teenager mischief. The marks were too precise, cut too deep for any knife. They looked more like claw marks, if claws could be 3 feet long and sharp enough to cut through bark like butter. The patterns were strange too. Not random scratches, but deliberate designs that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift when I wasn't focusing on them, like words written in a language my eyes couldn't quite read. I took photos with my camera, trying to document everything properly. Through the viewfinder, the marks looked even stranger, darker somehow, as if they were pulling light into themselves. Must be some kind of tool, I muttered, though I couldn't imagine what kind. Maybe a chainsaw with a custom blade. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Chainsaws left sawdust. These cuts were clean, sealed somehow, and they were warm to the touch. Plunge in. Sarah, got those vandalism marks. Gonna need someone from the county to take a look. These aren't normal. Unresolved. How not normal? I stared at the carved trees, trying to find words. Just not normal. I'm gonna look around for more damage. Copy that. Watch yourself up there. The deeper I went into the woods, the wronger everything felt. Trees seemed to lean in too close. Shadows fell at angles that didn't match the sun. My compass needle spun lazy circles, pointing everywhere and nowhere.
I'd been in these mountains long enough to trust my instincts, and right now every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. The rational part of my brain, the part trained in forest management and emergency procedures, said it was just fatigue, maybe low blood sugar. Time to head back, but I kept walking. Tomorrow from the trail, I found the first body. The hiker had been missing for 3 days. Janet Morris, age 34, from Asheville. She'd been reported missing by her boyfriend when she failed to return from what was supposed to be a day hike. Search and rescue had combed the area twice. They'd missed her by 20 feet. Janet sat against a poplar tree, perfectly upright, eyes wide open and staring at nothing. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. She looked almost peaceful if you ignored the expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. I'd seen death before. Heart attacks on the trail, hunting accidents, the occasional overdose. This was different. This was wrong in ways that made my skin crawl and my hands shake as I reached for my radio. "I need you to patch me through to Sheriff's Department. I've got a body." "Say again?" "Janet Morris. I found her." The next hour was a blur of phone calls, GPS coordinates, and waiting. I secured the scene as best I could, took photos, tried not to look too closely at Janet's face. Her eyes seemed to track my movements, though I knew that was impossible. Deputy Frank Collins arrived first. See simple answers where complex questions lived. He took one look at Janet and pronounced it death by exposure. "Happens every year," he said, not unkindly. "City folks underestimate these mountains. Gets cold up here at night, even in October." "Frank, look at her position. She didn't just sit down and die. Someone positioned her like that." "Maybe she got disoriented, found a place to rest. Hypothermia makes people do strange things." Wanted to argue, but what could I say? That the trees seemed wrong? That my compass was spinning? That every fiber of my being screamed this wasn't natural? So I kept my mouth shut and helped bag the body. The coroner took Janet away around sunset. Frank promised to file his report, said there'd probably be an autopsy just to be safe. Routine stuff. I should have gone home then, a beer, and tried to forget the look in Janet Morris's dead eyes. Instead, I found myself walking back toward the carved trees. The forest felt different at twilight. Shadows grew thick and strange, pooling in places where no shadow should be. The carved marks seemed deeper now, darker, as if they were drinking the fading light. I switched on my flashlight and immediately wished I hadn't. The beams revealed something impossible. Where Janet's body had been found, the trees around the spot were different. Not damaged exactly, but changed. Their bark had turned dark, almost black, and seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I was just a trick of the light, but as my beam swept across the blackened bark, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Buffering, faces, human faces, pressed into the bark like it was soft clay instead of solid wood. Dozens of them, twisted in expressions of terror and agony, men, women, even children, all of them screaming silently from inside the trees. I stumbled backward, my light dancing wildly across the impossible sight. But when I steadied the beam and looked again, there was nothing. Just ordinary bark on ordinary trees. "Get a grip, Obi," I whispered to myself. "Just stress. Finding a body will mess with anyone's head." But even as I said it, I heard something that shouldn't have been there. Breathing. Slow and out, in and out, like the mountains had developed lungs. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing but trees and shadows and my own hammering heart. I breathed continued. I backed toward the trail at once. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees that was darker than the darkness around it. Roughly human-shaped but wrong somehow, like a person stretched thin and made of night itself. It glided between the tree trunks without disturbing so much as a leaf. No footsteps, no sound except that terrible breathing. And it was getting closer. I ran,
crashed through the underbrush like a spooked deer, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. Branches grabbed at my clothes and scratched my face, but I didn't slow down until I reached my truck in the parking area. Blinds shaking, I fumbled with the keys and locked the doors as soon as I was inside. The engine turned over on the third try, and I drove down the mountain faster than was safe, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. Muted, nothing followed me. Nothing I could see, anyway. At home, I poured 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. Stress, I decided. The shock of finding Janet Morris had triggered some kind of episode. Maybe I needed to talk to someone, get some counseling. The department offered that kind of thing. But deep down, in the part of my mind that still remembered seminary lessons about things that went bump in the night, I knew better. I was dealing with something that didn't belong in any forest management manual. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Janet Morris staring at nothing, her face locked in that expression of absolute terror. And behind her, lurking just out of sight, was that shadow thing, moving between the trees like spilled ink. By morning, I'd almost convinced blindness. Almost. Obi, we got another missing hiker. Tom Bradley, 28, from Charlotte. His car's been sitting in the Devil's Courthouse lot since yesterday morning. Any idea girlfriend says he was interested in the old Cherokee stories? Probably headed up toward the rock formations. Right where I'd found Janet Morris. I met the search team at the parking area. 6 volunteers from the local mountain rescue group, all good people who knew the forest almost as well as I did. We split up to cover more ground, but I made sure to take the trail toward the carved trees. I found Tom Bradley hanging 30 feet up in an oak tree. Freezes, not hanging like suicide, hanging like something had carried him up there and draped his body across the branches like a rag doll. His arms and legs dangled at impossible angles, clearly broken. But his face wore the same expression of terror I'd seen on Janet Morris. "How the hell did he get up there?" Deputy Collins asked when he arrived. He had to crane his neck to see the body properly. "Maybe he fell," said rescue team leader Mike Santos. "Tried to climb the tree for some reason, lost his grip." "From the inside?" I pointed to where Tom's body was positioned, clearly on the uphill side of the tree. "And look at the bark. No scuff marks, no broken branches. Nothing climbed this tree." Frank and Mike exchanged looks. I knew that look. It meant they thought I was losing it. "Animered," Frank said finally. "Bear, maybe. Could have dragged him up there." "No claw marks, no blood trail. And when's the last time you saw a bear climb 30 feet straight up?" But they'd made up their minds. Another hiking accident, another victim of people who didn't respect the mountains. Tom Bradley became another statistic, another reason to put up warning signs about proper trail safety. I helped get the body down, filled out the paperwork, and kept my mouth shut about shadow things and faces in the bark. But I also started carrying something extra in my pack. My daddy's old Bible. The one he'd given me when I left seminary. Just in case. The next 3 days brought 2 more disappearances. Sandra Wu, a photographer from Ring. Marcus Thompson, a geology student from Appalachian State, never came back from collecting rock samples. We found Sandra first, sealed inside a hollow tree that shouldn't have been big enough to hold a human body. The opening was barely wide enough for a rabbit, but somehow she was inside, curled up like she'd grown there. The tree had to be cut open to get her out. Same expression, same look of absolute terror. Marcus was worse. We found pieces of him scattered across half a mile of forest floor, but not torn apart by animals. Separated, cleanly, like he'd been taken apart by a surgeon, and then the pieces had been carefully arranged in a pattern I didn't want to understand. 5 people dead in 1 week, all in the same general area, all wearing that same expression of ultimate fear. The Forest Service wanted to close the section, bring in experts from the university. The Sheriff's Department was talking about calling in the FBI. Everyone had theories. Serial killer, bear attacks, some kind of toxic gas leak that was making people hallucinate. I knew better. That evening, I hiked back up to the carved trees one more time. I needed to see for myself what we were really dealing with. Blind's marks had changed. Where there had been 3 damaged trees, now there were 7. The carved patterns had spread like infection, dark wounds in the bark that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life. And as I watched, they grew, spread, like living things feeding on the trees themselves. I pulled out my daddy's Bible and read a passage from Psalms, something about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. My voice sounded small and lost among the trees. The shadows laughed. Not a sound I heard with my ears, but something deeper, a vibration that went straight to my bones and made my teeth ache. The laughter of something that found human fear absolutely delicious. That's when it stepped out from behind the oak tree. The shadow thing was tall, maybe 8 feet, and it moved like smoke given form. No real features except for its eyes, 2 points of cold light that seemed to burn without warmth. When it looked at me, I understood why the others had worn that expression of terror. Unresolved was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that fed on fear and despair, that turned forests into hunting grounds and people into prey. "You see me," it said, though it had no mouth. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like wind through dead leaves. Most never do, until the end. Run. My legs wouldn't work. Confiscated. "You know what I am," it continued. "Seminary boy, minister's son. You studied the old books, learned the old names." I found my voice somewhere deep in my throat. "What do you want?" "Well, I have always wanted. Fear, despair, the sweet terror of humans who realize how small they truly are." The thing moved closer, and with each step, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs. "Conservatives have fed me for centuries," it said. "Cherokee knew my name once, called me Shadow That Hunts, but they forgot, as humans always forget. Only the trees remember." I fumbled for the Bible in my pack, though my hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. "Words," the shadow thing laughed. "Pretty words from a pretty book. Do you have faith to match them, failed minister?" That stung, hit right where I was weakest, where I'd always doubted myself. Maybe that's why I'd really left seminary, not because I loved the forest, but because I'd never truly believed. "I serve God's creation," I managed to say. "You serve yourself, hiding in these mountains because the real world was too hard, too complicated, too full of people who needed real answers instead of empty platitudes." With each word, my strength drained away. The thing was right. I had run away. From responsibility, from faith, from anything that demanded more than surface commitment. "Now you will serve me," it said, reaching out with fingers made of living shadow. "Join the others. Feed my trees. Feed my darkness." The cold touch of its hand was like ice straight from hell. But just before those shadow fingers reached my face, something unexpected happened. I got angry. "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. The shadow thing paused, those burning eyes fixed on mine. "I don't care what you are, or how long you've been here," I said, and meant it. "These are my mountains, my forest, my responsibility." I opened the Bible, though I could barely see the pages in the darkness, but I didn't need to see them. 16 years of Sunday school had burned some passages deep into my memory. "The Lord is my light and my salvation," I began, voice gaining strength with each word. "Whom shall I fear?" Reinforced, the shadow thing recoiled like I'd hit it with a branding iron. "Words," it hissed. "Empty words from a man who lost his faith." "Maybe I did," I admitted. "Maybe I ran away from God because I was scared. But I never ran away from what was right." I thought about Janet Morris, sitting dead against that tree. Tom Bradley, broken and hanging like a discarded toy. Sandra Wu, trapped inside impossible spaces. Marcus Thompson, scattered like puzzle pieces across the forest floor. "You killed innocent people," I said. "People who came here to find peace, to connect with something bigger than themselves. You turned their wonder into terror, their joy into despair." The things circled me now, moving like smoke, looking for weaknesses. They were food, nothing more, as you will be. I
Don't think so. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it directly at the creature. It screamed, a sound like wind through broken glass, and part of its form dissolved. "Light," I said, understanding finally dawning. "You're a shadow, and shadows can't exist in the light." But the flashlight was battery-powered, weak. The shadow thing pulled itself back together, though it kept its distance now. "Clever boy," it snarled, "but your little light will fail. Batteries die, and I am eternal." It was right about the batteries. My beam was already growing dimmer, but I had something else. I fumbled in my pack for the emergency flares every ranger carried. Found one, pulled the tab. Brilliant red light exploded around us, turning the forest into a scene from hell. The shadow thing shrieked and fled deeper into the trees, but I could see it was hurt. Pieces of its form kept falling away like ash. "You cannot destroy me," it called from the darkness beyond my circle of light. "I am older than your God, older than your Christ." "Maybe," I said, lighting another flare, "but you're not older than light itself." I started walking toward the carved trees, holding the flare high. Where the red light touched the dark bark, it began to smoke and crack. The faces I'd seen pressed into the wood screamed silently and faded away. "Stop!" The shadow thing's voice was weaker now, more desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing." Contested plenty. "You're a parasite, a thing that feeds on human misery. And you've been using my forest as your hunting ground." I touched the flare to the carved marks on the first tree. They hissed and bubbled like acid, then faded away completely. The tree's bark returned to normal brown. The shadow thing rushed at me then, all subtlety gone, just raw desperation and hunger, trying to extinguish my light with its darkness. I held up my daddy's Bible like a shield. Where the creature's shadow fingers touched the leather cover, they burned away like paper in a fire. "And the light shines in the darkness," I quoted, "and the darkness has not overcome it." With each word, the thing grew smaller, weaker. I moved to the second tree, then the third, burning away the marks with my flare. The creature's screams echoed through the mountains, but they were growing fainter. "This isn't possible," it wailed. "You have no faith. You abandoned your calling." "Did abandon one calling," I said, touching the flare to the last carved mark. "But I found another one. Taking care of God's creation, protecting people who come here looking for peace." The mark hissed and disappeared. The shadow thing let out one final scream and collapsed in on itself like smoke being sucked down a drain. Conflicting fell over the forest. Real silence this time, not the oppressive quiet of held breath, but the peaceful stillness of a place finally at rest. My flare sputtered and died, but I wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. The regular shadows were just shadows now, natural and harmless. I made my way back to the parking area by the light of my phone, tired but strangely at peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd actually done something that mattered. Something that made a difference. The official reports listed all 5 deaths as hiking accidents. Exposure, falls, animal attacks, neat explanations that fit in proper boxes and didn't give anyone nightmares. I didn't argue. Who would have believed the truth? After a month of safety improvements, new trail markers, warning signs, updated maps, hikers started coming back, drawn by the autumn colors and the crisp mountain air. None of them disappeared. In my daddy's Bible, the emergency flares. Some of the other rangers tease me about getting religion in my old age. I let them. Better they think I'm becoming a holy roller than know what really happened up there. 3 months later, I got a call that we see the reports from the ground. I just find out in the room. The 3 months later, I get at work that the problem the float, I have to get man. 3 months later, I got a call that we have all extra due. The second report stage with the Biber, I report that we did at the part of my heavy. 3 months later, I got a call that the fruit is not incompletely. He was more than that reports he was recognized without my heis. It was more important to the float. I can be short that one of the project of the property will having timely report, because the florist completely is reported by something everywhere. The day that I did will come down to the along to a 10 point. The float didn't add a complication. This made them coming first, I have to long. I got a call that changed everything. Obi? Sarah's voice was tight with worry. We got a situation up at Grandfather Mountain. 3 missing hikers, all in the same area. Local ranger says the trees up there are, well, he's asking specifically for you. I looked out my office window at the peaceful forest beyond. Sunlight filtered through healthy green leaves, birds sang in the branches, and everything looked exactly like it should. But I knew better now. Knew that darkness could hide in the most beautiful places, feeding on fear and turning wonder into terror. Tell them I'll be there tomorrow morning, I said. And Sarah? Tell them to bring extra batteries for their flashlights. Extra batteries? Trust me on this one. I hung up the phone and pulled out my Bible, turning to a passage I'd been reading a lot lately. Ephesians, chapter 6. The one about putting on the armor of God to stand against the spiritual forces of evil in the dark places. For 16 years, I'd thought my job was about preventing forest fires and rescuing lost tourists. Turns out, I'd been called to something bigger, something that required faith instead of just forestry training. The mountains of North Carolina are full of beauty and wonder, ancient secrets and timeless peace. But they're also home to things that don't belong in any ranger manual or safety pamphlet. Things that hunt in the shadows between the trees. Lucky for the hikers and campers who come seeking adventure, they've got someone watching over them now. Someone who knows that the real dangers don't always have claws and fangs. Sometimes they're made of darkness itself. And sometimes the only thing that can fight that darkness is a failed seminary student with a $5 flashlight and just enough faith to do what needs doing. My name is Obadiah Thornfield, and I protect these mountains from more than just forest fires. The shadows better remember that.